The microphone stand felt cold under my grip. The Scottsdale Country Club ballroom hummed with the sound of 200 investors cutting into filet mignon and sipping imported wine. At table 1, my father Harrison leaned back in his chair. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a smile that convinced half the room he was a visionary. He raised his wine glass toward the stage, waiting for me to deliver the keynote speech that would save his failing firm. Beside him sat Victoria. The ballroom chandeliers caught the silver and turquoise stones resting against her collarbone. My stomach turned. It was my late mother's sacred Hopi heirloom. Victoria had melted down the intricate traditional silverwork and reset the stones into a stiff generic choker so it would match her designer evening gown. I slipped my left hand into my blazer pocket. My fingers traced the jagged edges of a single key. It belonged to a 2008 Honda Civic. I had exactly 60 seconds to dismantle my father's reputation and hand the evidence of his federal crimes over to his lead investor. But to understand why I stared into his smiling face and did not hesitate, we have to rewind the clock. Before I pull the trigger on the rest of this story, please take a second to subscribe to Luke Vengeance, but only if you value the truth over family loyalty. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Chloe Morgan. I am 23 years old, holding a doctorate in epidemiology. Now let me take you back 4 years to the afternoon my father erased me from his life. The Arizona sun beat against the windshield of my Civic. I was 19, sweating through my t-shirt, driving north on Interstate 10 after crushing my freshman finals. The air conditioning was broken. The desert heat smelled like hot asphalt and sagebrush. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Harris and I answered it on speaker, expecting a question about dinner or what time I would pull into the driveway. "You are early," Harrison said. The line held a strange, sterile echo. "I finished my biology lab," I said, merging into the middle lane. "I will be home in an hour." There was a pause, the kind of silence that signals a shift in the ground beneath you. "Listen," Harrison said, his tone casual, distant. "We converted your room. Dylan needed the space for his monitors. He is streaming full-time now." My tires drifted toward the rumble strip. I corrected the wheel. Dylan was Victoria's 20-year-old son. They had been dating for 6 months. My room held my mother's hand-painted murals on the walls. Converted it to what, I asked? A home office. Victoria boxed up your stuff. You can take the living room sofa for the summer, but Dylan usually has his gaming friends over late, so do not make a big deal out of the noise. I pressed the brake pedal. The car slowed. Where am I supposed to sleep? Dad. Figure it out, Chloe. You are an adult. The line went dead. The dial tone filled the stifling air inside the car. I pulled into a dusty gas station lot, shifted into park, and stared at the cracked dashboard. My mother had spent her final weeks in a hospice bed holding my hand, her breathing ragged. She pulled me close one evening and whispered, "Never let a man hold the keys to your safety net, not even your father." I sat in the heat for 10 minutes. I did not scream. I put the car in drive, turned the steering wheel, and pointed the headlights back toward Scottsdale. The tires of my Honda Civic chewed the gravel as I swung the car back toward the southbound ramp of Interstate 10. The fuel gauge hovered near empty. The dashboard clock read 21:14 in the afternoon. The heat radiating through the windshield felt thick enough to choke on. I kept my eyes fixed on the white lines blurring past the hood. My father had just told me to figure it out. I thought about the house in North Scottsdale. It was a sprawling southwestern-style property with exposed wooden beams and a courtyard shaded by ancient cottonwood trees. My mother chose that house. She painted the walls of my bedroom herself. She spent an entire summer tracing intricate desert wildflowers along the baseboards while the chemotherapy port rested under her collarbone. She left those flowers behind so I would never wake up in a sterile room. Victoria boxed them up. Victoria needed the space for Dylan. Victoria entered our lives 6 months after the funeral. She arrived at a country club charity dinner wearing a tailored silk dress and a smile practiced in front of a mirror. She latched on to my father with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. Harrison was grieving, wealthy, and vulnerable. He owned a regional insurance brokerage that carried a heavy reputation in Scottsdale. He liked being seen as a savior. Victoria liked being saved. She brought her 20-year-old son Dylan with her. Dylan carried a vaping habit, a string of failed community college courses, and an unearned confidence fueled by whatever cryptocurrency trend he was losing money on that week. Within 2 months, Victoria replaced the living room furniture. Within 4 months, she replaced my mother's photographs with stylized portraits of her and Harrison. And now, on the afternoon I finished my freshman year, she replaced me. I drove past the exit for North Scottsdale. My foot hovered over the brake. Every instinct wired into a 19-year-old brain screamed at me to go home, to walk through the front door, demand my key, and fight for my space. I pictured Dylan sitting in my mother's hand-painted room, yelling into a headset while empty energy drink cans piled up on my childhood desk. I pictured my father standing in the hallway adjusting his expensive watch, telling me to stop being dramatic. I kept my foot on the gas. I took the exit for Arizona State University instead. Scottsdale during the summer holds a specific kind of cruelty. The sun bakes the concrete until the city feels like the inside of a kiln. By nightfall, the temperature drops, leaving a dry, hollow chill in the air. I parked on the 4th level of a campus parking structure. I chose a corner spot hidden behind a concrete pillar out of the direct line of sight of the security cameras. I turned off the engine. The silence in the car rang in my ears. I laid my seat as far back as the hinges allowed. I cracked the windows just enough to let air circulate without letting anyone slip their fingers inside. The first night was an exercise in pure panic. Every passing car sounded like a threat. Every shadow stretching across the concrete wall looked like a person. I kept the keys clamped in my right hand, the sharp metal digging into my palm. I locked the doors and stared at the ceiling fabric of the Civic. My spine ached against the uneven contour of the driver's seat. I drifted into a shallow sleep only when my eyes burned too much to stay open. At 5 a.m, a campus security truck rolled past my row. The yellow flashing lights washed over the interior of my car. I held my breath, sliding down until my head rested near the floor mats. The truck idled for 10 seconds before moving on. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was a straight-A epidemiology student, yet I felt like a criminal. I developed a survival routine. By 6:00 in the morning, I drove to the campus recreation center. I used my student ID to access the locker rooms before the athletes arrived. I washed my face with generic pink soap from the dispenser. I brushed my teeth in the mirror, watching the dark circles form under my eyes. I changed into clean lab clothes I kept folded in a duffel bag in the trunk. I walked out of the gym, blending in with the summer session students. No one knew the girl reading medical textbooks in the library corner slept behind a steering wheel. Food became a mathematical equation. I had exactly $42 in my checking account. My father controlled the joint college savings account my mother left me, and I refused to ask him for a transfer. I lived on peanut butter crackers and tap water. I sat in the student union building chewing the dry crackers, calculating how many days I could stretch a single box. On the 4th day, I made the mistake of opening social media. The campus library offered free wireless internet. I sat at a computer terminal, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I opened an application and saw Victoria's profile at the top of my feed. She posted a photo gallery. The location tag read, "At a luxury resort in Sedona." The first image showed Victoria and Harrison holding champagne flutes on a private balcony. Harrison wore a new linen shirt. Victoria wore a designer sun hat. The caption read, "Weekend getaway with my amazing boys. So blessed." The second image showed Dylan. He sat at a high-end steakhouse table, cutting into a thick ribeye wearing a brand-new luxury watch, the kind of watch that cost more than my entire semester tuition. My stomach cramped. A sharp metallic taste rose in the back of my throat. I looked down at the plastic wrapper of crackers resting next to my keyboard. My father told me to sleep on the sofa because he had no space. He told me to figure it out. While I hid from security guards and washed my hair in a public sink, he bought steak and champagne for a woman who erased my mother's memory and funded the lifestyle of a boy who took my room. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. The anger did not arrive in a fiery rush. It seeped into my bones like freezing water. It hardened something fundamental inside me. I pulled out my phone and found Harrison's contact name. A single text message would end my discomfort. I could type an apology I did not mean. I could beg for the sofa. I could surrender my pride for a hot meal and a safe roof. I remembered my mother's warning: never let a man hold the keys to your safety net. If I went back, I would always be a guest in my own home. I would always be dependent on Harrison's mood and Victoria's approval. I would spend the rest of my life shrinking myself to fit into whatever small corner they allowed me to occupy. I deleted Harrison's contact from my phone. I closed the social media application. I threw the empty cracker wrapper into the trash. I walked out of the library and headed back toward the parking structure. The heat hit my face, but I did not flinch. I had nowhere to go, but I knew exactly where I stood. I survived 4 days in the Honda Civic. I could survive another night. But a 19-year-old body running on cracker crumbs and zero sleep has a limit. The human system requires rest. By the 11th day, the exhaustion outran my willpower. My hands began to shake during my lab shift. My vision narrowed. The careful facade I built to hide my homelessness started to crack under the strain of simple biology. I was about to break. And the person who found me at my lowest point was the most unforgiving woman on the entire university campus. The fluorescent lights of the epidemiology lab hummed a low, steady frequency that felt like a drill pressing into my skull. Day 11 of sleeping in a car strips away your higher cognitive functions. You stop thinking about the future. You only think about the next glass of water, the next shadow on the concrete wall, the next breath. I stood at a stainless steel workstation holding a micropipette. My job was to transfer precise volumes of a synthetic venom compound into 96 well plates. The task required a steady hand. My hands were vibrating. The air conditioning in the science building ran on full blast, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the Scottsdale asphalt outside. Yet sweat gathered at the base of my neck. My vision swam with dark floating spots. I tried to focus on the tiny plastic wells, but the transparent grid blurred into a solid white block. The sharp smell of bleach and agar cultures turned my empty stomach inside out. A glass slide slipped from my fingers. It hit the counter and shattered into a dozen jagged splinters. I stared at the broken glass. A sob climbed up my throat, thick and heavy. I could not cry in the lab. Crying meant drawing attention. Attention meant questions from the faculty. Questions meant campus security discovering the Honda Civic parked in Structure C. I swept the glass shards into the sharps disposal bin, stripped off my latex gloves, and bolted for the hallway. I pushed through the heavy fire doors and descended the concrete stairwell to the basement restroom. It was the oldest bathroom in the building, rarely used by anyone but the janitorial staff. I dropped my canvas duffel bag onto the tile floor. I leaned over the porcelain sink, turned the cold tap on full blast, and splashed water onto my face. My reflection in the mirror belonged to a stranger. My skin carried a gray, translucent pallor. My dark hair hung in flat, dirty strands. I grabbed a handful of cheap industrial pink soap from the wall dispenser and began scrubbing my scalp right there under the faucet. I needed to wash the smell of stale car exhaust from my skin. I needed to feel clean for 5 minutes. The heavy wooden door creaked open. I froze. Water dripped from my chin onto the collar of my scrub top. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood in the doorway. She wore a tailored black blazer, her silver hair pulled back into a severe knot. She was the director of the epidemiology department. She possessed a terrifying reputation for firing graduate students who mislabeled samples. She did not tolerate excuses. She did not hand out second chances. She stood perfectly still, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She looked at my dripping hair. She looked at the pink soap pooled on the counter. She looked at the canvas duffel bag stuffed with rolled-up T-shirts and a thin blanket sitting on the floor. We stared at each other for a long 10 seconds. I waited for the dismissal. I waited for her to tell me to pack up my locker and leave the premises. "You dropped a slide in the main lab," Reed said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I am sorry it slipped. I cleaned it up." Reed stepped further into the restroom. The door clicked shut behind her. She crossed her arms. "You are calculating molarity concentrations for my neurotoxin research. I require precision. I cannot have an assistant whose hands shake because she is malnourished." I stepped back from the sink. "I am fine. Just a little tired. Do not insult my intelligence, Morgan." Reed walked over to the duffel bag and nudged it with the toe of her leather shoe. "You are living out of this bag." "Where are you parking Structure C?" I whispered. The truth surrendered itself. I had no energy left to construct another lie. Level 4 behind the elevator shaft. How many days 11? Reed did not sigh. She did not offer a sympathetic smile. She did not ask about my parents or demand a tragic backstory. She operated on pure brutal logic. Pity was useless to her. Solutions mattered. Wipe your face, Reed instructed. You are following me home. I stood paralyzed. Dr. Reed, I do not have money for rent. I can just sleep in the library tonight. You are not sleeping in a public facility while handling my pathogens, she replied, turning toward the exit. I own a property in North Scottsdale. It has 3 bedrooms. I live alone. You will occupy the guest room. You will not pay rent. In exchange, you will arrive at the lab at 6 o'clock every morning. You will sterilize the centrifuges, and you will maintain a flawless grade point average. If your grades drop below a 4.0, I will change the locks. Do we have an agreement? It was a transaction, a cold, calculated contract. It was exactly what I needed. No fake affection, no strings attached to someone else's emotional baggage. Yes, I said. Get your bag, she commanded. I followed the taillights of Reed's Volvo through the dusk of the high desert. We arrived at a secluded Southwestern-style house surrounded by thick cottonwood trees. The guest room smelled like lavender and old paper. A real mattress sat in the center of the floor. A desk rested near a window facing the McDowell Mountains. I locked the door behind me, collapsed onto the mattress, and slept for 14 hours straight. The physical survival crisis ended that night. The psychological war was just beginning. Dr. Reed kept her word. The house provided a fortress of quiet routine. I woke up, drank black coffee, drove to the lab, and worked until my eyes burned. The weekends passed in a blur of textbook pages and scientific journals. I did not text my father. He did not text me. The silence stretched through July, thick and unyielding. I convinced myself I had outrun his reach. I believed the worst of the damage was confined to a stolen bedroom and 11 nights of bad sleep. I underestimated him. The first week of August brought a shift in the air. The desert heat broke, giving way to the monsoon season. Heavy gray clouds rolled over the mountain peaks, bringing sudden, punishing downpours. I sat at the desk in my new room, opening my laptop. The university bursar sent an automated email reminder. Fall tuition was due in 48 hours. I pulled my debit card from my wallet. My mother had planned for this exact moment. Before the cancer took her, she purchased a life insurance policy. She wanted to ensure my education remained untouchable. $32,000 sat in a joint college savings account. Harrison convinced me to keep his name on the ledger for tax purposes when I turned 18. I trusted him. He was grieving alongside me. We were supposed to be a team. I logged into the banking portal. I typed in my password. I navigated to the Savings tab. The screen refreshed. I stared at the numbers. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Available balance $14.12. My lungs seized. The air vanished from the room. I refreshed the page. The numbers did not change. I clicked on the transaction history. A single line item stared back at me, dated 3 weeks ago. A withdrawal of $31,985. The destination was an external account. My father did not just take my room. He did not just replace me with Victoria and Dylan. He reached into the grave, took the only safety net my mother left me, and burned it to the ground. I did not cry. A terrifying icy calm washed over my skin. I closed the laptop. I picked up my car keys. I needed to see the paper trail. I needed to know exactly how he executed the theft. And I knew the local bank branch opened in 20 minutes. The heavy glass doors of the First National Bank branch offered a stark contrast to the unforgiving heat of the Scottsdale morning. I pushed through them and stepped into an environment engineered to project wealth and security. The air conditioning hummed cold and sterile. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the recessed lighting above. I stood near the entrance for a moment, acutely aware of my faded canvas shoes and the generic scrub top I wore for my lab shifts. I did not look like someone who belonged in a high-end financial institution, but my name was on the ledger, and I possessed the legal right to demand answers. I walked to the teller counter. The woman behind the glass wore a crisp navy blazer and a silver name tag that read, Sharon. She offered a practiced, polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I slid my Arizona driver's license across the marble surface. "I need the transaction history for a joint savings account, specifically a withdrawal made 3 weeks ago." Sharon typed my details into her terminal. The clicking of her keyboard sounded like a metronome counting down a detonation. She frowned slightly at the screen, her eyes darting from the monitor to my face. "I see the account, Miss Morgan. It shows a near-zero balance. The funds were transferred to an external routing number. I need the physical transfer slip," I said. My voice sounded detached, operating on a frequency far removed from the panic twisting in my gut. "I did not authorize the transfer. I need to see the signature on file." Sharon hesitated. Protocol usually required a manager for disputed transactions, but my unwavering stare offered no room for negotiation. She nodded, stepped away from her station, and disappeared into a back office. I waited. 3 minutes felt like an hour. I stared at the complimentary pens chained to the counter. My mother had spent her final months negotiating with insurance agents from a hospice bed. She endured hours of hold music, her breathing shallow, just to ensure that $32,000 would guarantee my college graduation. It was her final act of protection. Sharon returned. She held a single sheet of printer paper. She laid it flat on the counter and pushed it toward me. "Here is a copy of the wire authorization," she said softly. I looked down at the document. The ink was dark and crisp. The date matched a Tuesday during the second week of July. The amount was $31,985. The receiving account belonged to a local automotive dealership. My eyes drifted to the bottom right corner, the signature line. My name was written in blue ink. Chloe Morgan. A sudden, freezing numbness spread through my chest. My mother taught me cursive writing at our kitchen table when I was 7 years old. My signature carried a specific rounded loop on the capital letter C and a sharp peak on the letter M. The handwriting on this document mimicked the letters, but the pressure was wrong. The slant leaned too far to the right. The loops were hurried, jagged. Harrison had forged my signature. He did not just drain the account out of negligence. He did not make a mistake. He sat at a desk, practiced writing his daughter's name, and committed a felony to steal a dead woman's money. "Would you like me to call the fraud department?" Sharon asked, her tone shifting to genuine concern. "We can freeze the remaining $14 and open an investigation." I folded the paper precisely in half, then into quarters. I tucked it into the front pocket of my scrub pants. "No," I said. "Thank you for your time." I walked out of the bank. The heat struck me like a physical blow, but I felt nothing. I sat in the driver's seat of my Honda Civic and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone. The withdrawal went to an automotive dealership. I opened a social media application and navigated directly to Dylan's public profile. He posted a new photograph 3 days ago. Dylan stood in the driveway of my old house. He leaned against the hood of a midnight blue Ford pickup truck. It featured a custom suspension lift, oversized all-terrain tires, and chrome running boards. He wore designer sunglasses and held a set of keys in the air. The caption read, "Big thanks to Harrison for the early birthday gift. Best stepdad ever." I stared at the image of the truck. It occupied the exact spot on the concrete where I used to park my car. Harrison bought Dylan a $30,000 toy. He funded it with the safety net my mother built for me with her dying breaths. My thumb hovered over the phone keypad. I could dial 911. I could drive to the police precinct, hand the detective the forged slip, and file a report for identity theft and wire fraud. It was the logical choice. It was the immediate retaliation. But I lowered the phone. Harrison Cole was not a street criminal. He was a prominent insurance broker. He sponsored the local police athletic league. He played golf at the country club with municipal judges and city councilmen. He wore custom suits and shook hands with the mayor. I was a 19-year-old girl living in a borrowed room, wearing faded scrubs with $14 to my name. If I filed a report now, Harrison would hire a defense attorney who cost $1,000 an hour. He would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would say he had verbal permission to borrow the funds. The justice system favored the man who bought the uniforms. A quick revenge was a weak revenge. If I struck now, he would receive a slap on the wrist. I needed him to have farther to fall. I needed him to build his entire life, his business, and his fragile ego on top of that stolen money. So when I finally pulled the rug out from under him, everything would collapse at once. I started the engine and drove to a hardware store. I spent $12 of my final $14 on a small fireproof lockbox. I returned to Dr. Reed's house in North Scottsdale. I placed the folded bank slip inside the metal box, locked it, and shoved it deep under my mattress. The weapon was loaded. I just needed the patience to wait for the perfect shot. The strategy required a silent, grinding ascent. I threw myself into the university laboratory. The quiet routine of Dr. Reed's Southwestern-style house provided the perfect bunker. I worked 80-hour weeks. I memorized epidemiological models until my eyes blurred. I analyzed venom peptides and ran statistical regressions long after the other research assistants went home to their families. My success became a methodical, unstoppable machine. I maintained a flawless grade point average. I earned independent research grants. I constructed an academic armor that no one could pierce. 2 years passed. I transitioned from a displaced teenager into a recognized scientific mind within the university. My world consisted of sterile centrifuges, datasets, and the quiet desert evenings on Reed's patio. But a predator never stops hunting. Word travels fast in Scottsdale. The local business community operates like a small town. Through quiet conversations at faculty dinners, I learned that Harrison's elite insurance brokerage was bleeding cash. Victoria developed a taste for European vacations and luxury retail. Dylan dropped out of his third consecutive college program and began treating Harrison's credit cards like a limitless slot machine. The facade of their wealthy, perfect family required an endless supply of fuel, and Harrison was running out of wood to burn. I thought my silence protected me. I thought my locked doors and unlisted address made me invisible to them. But desperation creates a very specific kind of audacity. They had drained my past, and now they were looking for a way to siphon my future. The quiet of my junior year shattered. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was walking across the campus courtyard carrying a stack of research folders when a familiar figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar blocking my path. Victoria stood in the shade of the university architecture building. Her designer trench coat looked rumpled. Her mascara carried a dark smudge beneath her lower lashes. It was a careful, curated aesthetic of distress. She reached out. I stepped back. The physical distance between us felt like a chasm. "Chloe," she said, her voice shaking, "I need your help." I adjusted the grip on my research folders, the spine of a heavy medical textbook pressed against my ribs. I did not speak. Silence forces the opponent to fill the void, and desperate people always say too much when they are forced to fill a quiet space. Victoria launched into a rapid monologue. She described a claustrophobic nightmare inside the house in North Scottsdale. Harrison possessed a terrible temper, she claimed. He locked her out of the banking accounts. He scrutinized every grocery receipt. He treated her like a prisoner in a gilded cage. She painted a portrait of a terrified woman looking for a sudden escape hatch. She wanted me to relate to her. She wanted me to see us as two victims of the same predator. I thought about the fireproof box hidden under my mattress, the folded piece of paper carrying my forged signature. I wondered if Harrison forged Victoria's name too, or if she was a willing participant until the funds ran dry. "I just need a loan," Victoria whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if invisible spies were watching us from the courtyard. "A few thousand, just enough to get a hotel for a week so Dylan and I can figure out our next move. You are doing so well now. I saw the university newsletter, the article about your diagnostic biomarker patent. They said it could change the industry. There it was, the hook hidden inside the bait." I looked at her face. The smudged mascara did not match the pristine, freshly manicured acrylic nails gripping the lapels of her coat. A woman fleeing for her physical safety does not stop at a salon for a gel fill. My gaze drifted past her shoulder. The campus drop-off zone sat 30 yards away. A vehicle idled next to the curb. It was a midnight blue Ford pickup. The custom suspension lift elevated the chassis high above the pavement. The chrome running boards gleamed under the harsh desert sun. It was the exact truck my father bought with the $32,000 he stole from my mother's life insurance policy. The driver's side window was rolled down. Dylan sat behind the steering wheel. He drummed his fingers against the exterior door panel. A heavy, intricate gold watch encircled his wrist. The bezel caught the light, flashing a bright, expensive glare. It was a timepiece favored by day traders and cryptocurrency enthusiasts. It cost more than the emergency loan Victoria was begging for. The puzzle pieces snapped together with cold, unyielding logic. Victoria did not want an escape. She wanted a scouting report. Harrison's brokerage was collapsing under the weight of their spending. They drained his accounts. They drained my stolen inheritance. And now they needed a new well. They read the university press release about my biomedical patent. They saw a potential payout. Victoria drove to campus to test the waters to see if the displaced, homeless teenager still craved family validation enough to open her wallet. I looked back into Victoria's eyes. The fake tears pooled at the corners, waiting to fall. "You are wearing a fresh coat of clear polish on your nails," I said, keeping my voice level. The tension in my jaw tightened. "Your son is sitting in a $30,000 truck listening to the radio. He is wearing a chronograph watch that retails for 5 figures. You do not need a hotel. You need a new automated teller machine." Victoria blinked. The trembling in her lower lip stopped. The illusion shattered, revealing the calculating architecture underneath. "Do not turn your back on family." She snapped, her tone dropping an octave. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a brittle, defensive edge. "We took care of you. Harrison housed you for 18 years. You owe him. You owe us." I adjusted my folders again. "My father locked me out of my own home and told me to sleep on a sofa so your son could play video games. He forged my signature and stole the only money my dead mother left me. I owe you nothing. Do not ever approach me on this campus again." I stepped around her and continued walking toward the science quad. "You think you are untouchable because you wear a lab coat," Victoria called out. Her voice carried across the concrete, sharp and frantic. "You think you are safe behind these brick walls. You are not. Dylan is in trouble, serious legal trouble, and Harrison will do whatever it takes to fix it." I did not break my stride. I did not look back. "He is a major donor to your department," she yelled, the desperation finally genuine. "He knows the dean. He knows your lab director. If you do not help us voluntarily, he will force you to help us. He will burn your little academic career to the ground." The threat hung in the hot afternoon air, mingling with the scent of dry dust and exhaust fumes. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the epidemiology building, letting the cool, conditioned air wash over my skin. My pulse remained steady, but a new dangerous variable entered the equation. Harrison was a cornered animal. Cornered animals do not rely on logic. They rely on destruction. I walked down the hallway to the basement laboratory. Dr. Reed stood at the main workbench, reviewing a stack of diagnostic charts. She looked up as I placed my folders on the stainless steel counter. She possessed a rare ability to read the micro-expressions on my face. "You encountered a variable," Reed stated. It was not a question. "My father's girlfriend ambushed me in the courtyard," I replied, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "She tried to extract money. She mentioned my patent. She also mentioned Dylan is facing legal trouble." Reed set her pen down. The harsh fluorescent lights highlighted the sharp angles of her cheekbones. "Legal trouble is a broad term. Did she specify the jurisdiction? No. But she threatened my position here. She said Harrison is a major donor and will leverage his relationship with the dean to force my compliance." Reed let out a short, dry laugh. It held zero humor. "Harrison Cole pledges $5,000 a year to the Alumni Association to keep his name in the glossy brochures. He believes that buys him influence. He operates under the delusion that academia functions like a regional insurance racket. Will the dean entertain a meeting with him?" I asked, snapping the latex cuffs over my wrists. "The dean will entertain anyone who writes a check," Reed said, turning back to her charts. "But your patent is drawing interest from a multinational pharmaceutical firm. The university stands to earn a significant percentage of the licensing rights. You are no longer a replaceable undergraduate Morgan. You are a high-value asset. Harrison cannot touch you through official channels, which means he will try an unofficial route," I concluded. "Exactly." Reed tapped her pen against the metal table. "We need to define the threat before it defines us. We need to know exactly what kind of trouble Dylan is in and how deep the financial rot in Harrison's business goes. We cannot defend against a blind strike. How do we obtain that information? Harrison hides his ledgers behind a private accountant. Reed walked over to a locked filing cabinet. She retrieved a slim, leather-bound address book. I have spent 30 years navigating the politics of this city. I sit on the board of the Regional Medical Foundation. I share dinner tables with the men who underwrite Harrison's commercial loans. A man who steals from his own daughter will inevitably steal from his investors. It is a fundamental law of behavioral pathology. She opened the book and traced a manicured finger down a page of handwritten numbers. "You focus on the pathogen sequencing," Reed commanded, pulling her cell phone from her pocket. "I will initiate a quiet inquiry into the coal insurance brokerage. By the end of the week, we will know exactly how much water his ship has taken on." I nodded, turning toward the centrifuge. The rules of engagement shifted. I was no longer a 19-year-old girl sleeping in a borrowed car waiting for an apology that would never arrive. I was a scientist trained to isolate and neutralize toxic elements. My father assumed he held all the leverage. He assumed his tailored suits and country club handshakes rendered him invincible. He failed to realize that the most dangerous opponent is the one who operates in absolute silence. 3 days later, the silence broke. I sat in the quiet Southwestern-style house drinking black coffee, watching the sunrise over the McDowell Mountains. My cell phone vibrated on the wooden kitchen table. It was an email notification from the university provost's office. The subject line contained 3 words that sent a cold shockwave down my spine. Mandatory disciplinary hearing. Harrison did not wait for me to surrender. He executed his strike, and he aimed it directly at the only person who offered me sanctuary. The notification sitting in my inbox carried a subject line that felt like a live grenade: mandatory disciplinary hearing. To understand how my father manufactured a weapon strong enough to threaten my academic standing and drag Dr. Reed into a tribunal, you must understand the impenetrable fortress I built over the preceding 24 months. When I sat in my Honda Civic outside the bank 2 years prior holding the forged transfer slip, I faced a distinct choice. I could call the police, I could walk into a precinct, hand a detective the evidence, and accuse a prominent insurance broker of stealing his daughter's inheritance. But a 19-year-old girl wearing faded scrubs does not win a war of attrition against a man who buys golf clubs for city councilmen. If I struck then, he would hire an expensive defense team. He would muddy the waters. He would claim it was a misunderstanding over shared accounts. The justice system requires leverage, and I possessed none. I chose a different battlefield. I chose the silent route. The 2 years between discovering the theft and receiving that disciplinary email were defined by a grueling, relentless ascent. I did not take weekends off. I did not attend campus parties. I traded the typical undergraduate experience for 80-hour work weeks in the basement epidemiology laboratory. My existence shrank to the space between the microscope lens and the sterile stainless steel tables. We focused our research on desert-borne pathogens. Specifically, we analyzed the protein structures of rare zoonotic viruses transmitted by native rodent populations in the high desert. The work required a staggering level of precision. A single contaminated pipette tip could ruin 6 months of sequencing data. I learned to operate in a state of hypervigilance. My hands stopped shaking. My posture straightened. The soft, displaced teenager who cried in a campus restroom hardened into a meticulous, uncompromising scientist. Dr. Reed demanded excellence, and I delivered nothing less. We spent hours in the quiet Southwestern-style house, mapping transmission vectors on a whiteboard in her living room. I drank black coffee until my stomach burned running statistical regressions, until the numbers blurred on my laptop screen. The exhaustion sank deep into my muscle tissue, but it was a clean pain. It was the pain of building something no one could take away. While I constructed my academic armor in absolute silence, my father's empire was generating a different kind of noise. Scottsdale functions like a small town for the wealthy. Secrets do not stay hidden in the country club locker rooms. Dr. Reed occasionally hosted private dinners for visiting medical researchers and local hospital board members. I served as the quiet assistant during these evenings, pouring wine and collecting empty plates. The guests rarely paid attention to the girl clearing the table. They spoke freely. Through these hushed conversations over expensive cuts of beef, I tracked the slow, undeniable decay of the coal insurance brokerage. Harrison's firm was bleeding cash. The rumors painted a grim picture. He lost 2 major commercial clients to a rival agency in Phoenix. His lead underwriters were updating their resumes. The root cause of the financial hemorrhage was not market fluctuation. It was his own household. Victoria treated his bank accounts like an endless reservoir. She booked European river cruises and purchased imported leather furniture for a house that was already fully furnished. Dylan represented an even darker financial sinkhole. The boy who stole my bedroom dropped out of his 3rd attempt at a business degree. He transitioned into day trading and cryptocurrency speculation. He possessed 0 financial literacy, but carried the unearned arrogance of a prodigy. He lost tens of thousands of dollars on volatile investments, and Harrison quietly covered the margins to avoid public embarrassment. The mathematics of their lifestyle simply did not work. Harrison was drowning. He projected an image of regional wealth wearing custom suits and leasing luxury vehicles. But the foundation of his life was hollow. He was a man bailing water out of a sinking boat using a diamond-encrusted bucket. I listened to these whispers and felt a cold clinical satisfaction. I did not need to destroy him. He was dismantling himself. I just needed to stand far enough away to avoid the shrapnel when the structure finally collapsed. My own trajectory hit a critical milestone during the spring semester of my junior year. After 18 months of continuous data collection, Dr. Reed and I isolated a novel diagnostic biomarker. Our findings offered a faster, more accurate method for identifying specific pathogen strains before they became symptomatic in patients. It was a genuine breakthrough. Dr. Reed refused to take sole credit. She listed me as the primary co-author on the research paper. The university administration recognized the value of the discovery immediately. A major pharmaceutical firm expressed preliminary interest in the licensing rights. The university press office drafted a comprehensive article detailing our research. They published it on the main campus website and pushed the story to local media outlets. The headline featured my name, Chloe Morgan, undergraduate researcher pioneers diagnostic breakthrough. For 24 hours, I allowed myself to feel a pure, unadulterated sense of pride. I printed a copy of the article and placed it on the kitchen table in the Southwestern-style house. I looked at the black ink and knew my mother would have smiled. I built a safety net out of my own intellect. But public success acts like a beacon for parasites. The university shared the press release on their official social media channels. The post generated hundreds of likes and shares from alumni and local residents. I sat in the lab during a brief break, scrolling through the comments to read the feedback from other science departments. One comment sat at the top of the feed. The profile picture showed Harrison and Victoria smiling on a golf course. The text read, "So proud of my girl. I always knew she was destined for greatness. I raised a fighter." My lungs tightened. The audacity of the statement struck me like a physical blow. He did not raise a fighter. He abandoned a teenager. He changed the locks on my home, told me to sleep on a sofa, and stole the inheritance meant to fund the very education he was now claiming credit for. He spent 2 years ignoring my existence. But the moment my name carried prestige and potential financial value, he stepped into the public spotlight to claim ownership of my success. He needed his country club peers to see that comment. He needed his dwindling client base to believe he was the patriarch of a brilliant, successful family. He was using my achievement as a prop to reinforce his crumbling facade. My finger hovered over the screen. A wave of heat flushed across my neck. I wanted to reply. I wanted to type a list of his crimes into the public forum. I wanted to ask him how much of the stolen $32,000 he spent on Dylan's truck. I took a deep breath. I engaged the clinical detachment I learned at the microscope. Emotional outbursts feed narcissists. Silence starves them. I tapped the screen. I deleted his comment from the university page. I navigated to his personal profile and initiated a permanent block. I erased his digital footprint from my life with 3 simple keystrokes. I set my phone face down on the stainless steel counter and went back to my pathogen sequencing. I thought the block was a final boundary. I failed to anticipate his reaction to being shut out. Blocking him severed his access to my public prestige. It humiliated him. He realized I was no longer a frightened girl he could summon at will. The sudden realization that he could not profit from my upcoming patent triggered a desperate panic within his household. That panic pushed Victoria to ambush me in the campus courtyard with fake tears and stories of abuse. When Victoria failed to extract money or compliance from me, Harrison escalated his tactics. He bypassed the personal route and attacked my professional sanctuary, which brought me to the present moment. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the Southwestern-style house as I stared at the email from the provost. Mandatory disciplinary hearing. Dr. Reed walked into the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. She wore a heavy knit sweater, her silver hair pulled tight. She looked at my face, then at the glowing screen of my laptop. They sent the formal notice, she stated. Her voice held no surprise. I turned the laptop so she could read the text. Harrison filed a formal ethics complaint with the university board. He is claiming I misappropriated university laboratory funds for personal gain. He listed himself as a concerned alumni donor. Reed took a sip of her coffee. The ceramic mug clicked against the wooden table. It is a fabricated charge designed to freeze your patent negotiations, she said smoothly. He knows he cannot prove it. He only needs to create enough institutional doubt to force a settlement. He is using the university bureaucracy as a hostage negotiation. What is his ransom demand, I asked, though I already knew the shape of the answer. Reed pulled a separate envelope from her pocket. She slid it across the table. It carried the embossed logo of Harrison's insurance firm. He does not want a settlement from the university, Reed replied, her eyes narrowing. He wants a public performance. He sent a courier to my office this morning. He offered to withdraw the ethics complaint entirely, provided you agree to one specific condition. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavy, expensive. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. It was an invitation printed on thick cardstock with silver lettering. Harrison was hosting an elite investor gala at the Scottsdale Country Club at the end of the month. He needed to secure a massive influx of capital to save his brokerage. The handwritten note at the bottom of the invitation detailed his terms. I was to attend the gala as his guest of honor. I was to deliver the keynote speech. I was to stand in front of his wealthy investors and play the role of the devoted, brilliant daughter, effectively endorsing his character and his business. If I refused, he would push the ethics complaint. He would tie up my patent in endless university tribunals. He would drag Dr. Reed's spotless reputation through a public administrative mudslinging campaign. He backed me into a corner. He expected me to fold. I looked at Dr. Reed. She did not look worried. She looked like a predator analyzing a trap. We are going to accept his invitation, Reed said quietly. I stared at her. We cannot validate him. We cannot give him the endorsement he needs to steal more money from those investors. We are not going to endorse him, Morgan. Reed smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. We are going to use his stage to ensure he never sells another insurance policy in this state again. The air inside the university library archives carried the distinct dry scent of decaying paper and floor wax. 2 days had passed since Dr. Reed and I agreed to accept my father's blackmail attempt. We were not going to the Scottsdale Country Club to play the role of a devoted family. We were going to dismantle his facade on his own stage. But destroying a man who hides behind expensive suits and country club handshakes requires precise ammunition. I spent the afternoon pulling public financial disclosures, cross-referencing state insurance registry filings, and gathering any open-source data I could find on the coal brokerage. My eyes burned from staring at microfiche screens and dense spreadsheets. The numbers painted a picture of a company in steep decline, but the surface records lacked the fatal blow we needed. I packed my notes into my leather satchel and pushed through the heavy glass exit doors, stepping into the blinding late afternoon glare of the high desert. The heat radiated off the concrete courtyard. I adjusted the strap of my satchel, my mind calculating the next phase of our quiet investigation. "Chloe, please wait." The voice was thin, reedy, and laced with panic. I stopped. I turned toward the shadow cast by the brutalist architecture of the library entrance. Victoria stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. The woman standing in front of me bore little resemblance to the polished, arrogant socialite who replaced my mother. Her usual pristine aesthetic was fractured. She wore a high-end trench coat, but it looked wrinkled, hastily thrown on. Her blonde hair hung flat against her shoulders. Dark streaks of ruined mascara shadowed the skin beneath her lower lashes. She looked terrified. I tightened my grip on my satchel. I did not close the physical distance between us. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" She closed the gap herself, reaching out with trembling fingers to grasp my forearm. Her hands felt ice cold despite the summer heat. The scent of her expensive floral perfume mixed with the sharp, sour tang of nervous sweat. "You cannot go to the gala," she whispered, her eyes darting across the open courtyard as if expecting someone to emerge from the bushes. "Harrison is losing his grip. He sent that invitation to trap you. He thinks your presence will legitimize him in front of the investors. But the business is failing. He is erratic. He yells over every missing dollar. I am trapped in that house." I stared at her pale, frightened face. For a fleeting second, a dangerous emotion flickered inside my chest. Empathy. I knew the temperature of my father's anger. I knew how he could suck the oxygen out of a room, how his silence could feel like a physical punishment. I remembered the cold, clinical way he told me to sleep on a sofa and figure it out. If his financial empire was crumbling, the collateral damage behind closed doors would be immense. Maybe Victoria was not the architect of my displacement. Maybe she was just another naive woman who mistook his wealth for safety. And now she was paying the price. "He monitors my bank cards." Victoria continued, a single tear cutting a clean path through her ruined makeup. "I have no access to cash. Dylan and I need to leave Arizona before the firm goes under and takes us with it, but we have nothing." The plea hung in the dry air. "I saw the university press release," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "The article about your diagnostic biomarker. They said pharmaceutical companies are preparing to license the patent. They said it is a breakthrough." The flicker of empathy inside my chest extinguished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating static. "I just need a bridge loan," Victoria begged, squeezing my arm. "A small advance on your patent money, just enough to get a hotel in Colorado and hire a lawyer." "You are brilliant, Chloe. You have a future. We have nothing left. Please help us." A master manipulator relies on the target looking at the distraction rather than the sleight of hand. Victoria played the victim perfectly, the tears, the ruined makeup, the trembling voice. It was a flawless performance. But my training in the epidemiology lab taught me to ignore the obvious symptoms and look for the underlying vector. I slowly pulled my arm out of her grasp. I did not look at her face. I looked past her shoulder, tracing the trajectory of her earlier nervous glances. 30 yards away, parked illegally in the library loading zone, sat a midnight blue Ford pickup. The custom suspension lift and chrome running boards gleamed under the sun. The driver's side window was rolled down. Dylan leaned against the leather interior, scrolling through his phone. He looked bored. He rested his left arm on the windowsill. The afternoon light caught the intricate heavy metal resting on his wrist. It was a luxury chronograph timepiece, the specific model favored by day traders and cryptocurrency enthusiasts. It carried a retail value of at least $5,000. The puzzle assembled itself with ruthless clarity. Victoria was not a hostage seeking an escape route. She was a scout running reconnaissance. Harrison initiated the brutal frontal assault by sending the mandatory disciplinary hearing threat and the gala invitation. He played the enforcer. Victoria was playing the good cop. They read the article about my medical patent. They smelled a sudden massive payout. They knew Harrison's blackmail might force me to speak at the gala, but it would not give them direct access to my bank accounts. Victoria staged this ambush to gauge my wealth. She wanted to extract a cash advance before the public confrontation even happened. She wanted a parachute woven from my intellectual property. I returned my gaze to Victoria. The tears still pooled in her eyes, waiting for my compliance. "Your mascara is smeared," I said, keeping my vocal register flat and clinical. "But your acrylic nails feature a fresh, pristine gel fill." A woman fearing for her safety does not prioritize a 2-hour salon appointment before fleeing the state. Victoria blinked. The trembling in her jaw paused. "And your son," I continued, nodding toward the loading zone, "is currently sitting in a $30,000 truck wearing a timepiece that costs more than my annual laboratory stipend. If you require emergency funds to reach Colorado, I suggest Dylan sell his watch." The illusion fractured. The frightened, victimized posture evaporated. Victoria straightened her spine. The corners of her mouth pulled into a tight, bitter line. The desperation in her eyes shifted into a dark, naked greed. "You ungrateful little brat!" she hissed, her voice losing the reedy panic and dropping into a harsh, venomous sneer. "We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Your father fed you. He clothed you. You owe this family. You owe him." I adjusted my satchel. My father changed the locks on my home, told me to sleep on a couch, and forged my signature to steal the life insurance money left for my tuition. "I owe you nothing." I stepped around her, placing myself between her and the library doors. "If you or your son ever approach me on this campus again, I will have campus security arrest you for trespassing," I stated. "And tell Harrison I received his invitation. I will see him at the country club." I walked away. I did not look back to see her reaction. I did not need to. The decoy failed. Their desperate attempt to siphon my resources only confirmed the depth of their panic. They were out of options. I navigated the concrete pathways back toward the science quad, my mind racing. The pieces were moving into place, but I still lacked the definitive proof of Harrison's financial crimes. I needed the final nail for the coffin. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID displayed Dr. Reed's name. I swiped the screen to answer. "Did you find something in the public ledgers?" I asked. "I found something far better than public ledgers," Reed replied. Her voice sounded sharper than usual, carrying a dangerous electrical current. I tapped into my network on the hospital board. One of our senior administrators sits on the commercial loan committee for First National Bank. He owed me a favor. "What did he give you?" "What did he?" "He gave me a look at Harrison Cole's secondary accounting books," Reed said. The silence on the line stretched for 2 seconds, heavy with implication. "It is not just a failing business, Morgan. Your father is not just losing money to his girlfriend's shopping habits. What is he doing? He is running a shadow ledger," she explained. "He is taking the insurance premiums from his new commercial clients and using them to pay the claims of his older clients. He is using the surplus to cover Dylan's catastrophic cryptocurrency debts." I stopped walking. The heat of the pavement faded into the background. A Ponzi scheme. Precisely, Reed confirmed. And it is unraveling. That is why he needs this investor gala. He needs a sudden, staggering injection of capital from those millionaires to cover the missing premiums before the state auditors notice the discrepancy. He is using your pristine academic reputation as the bait to lure them in. I looked up at the McDowell Mountains looming over the city. My father was not just a thief. He was a federal criminal operating on borrowed time. "I have the documents," Reed added. "Come back to the house. We need to prepare the execution." I parked my Honda Civic in the gravel driveway of the North Scottsdale property. The desert sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the southwestern-style walls. I walked through the front door and found Dr. Reed standing at the kitchen island. A thick manila folder rested on the reclaimed wood surface. The overhead pendant lights illuminated stacks of printed spreadsheets, bank routing numbers, and state financial disclosures. "You said he was running a shadow ledger," I stated, dropping my leather satchel onto a dining chair. Reed slid a document across the smooth wood. "Look at the column labeled Administrative Expenditures." I leaned over the island and traced my finger down the page. The numbers defied logic. Harrison transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars from his commercial escrow accounts into unregulated digital wallets. He was bleeding his own clients dry to cover the catastrophic losses Dylan accumulated on volatile cryptocurrency exchanges. The deficit was staggering. My father was operating a financial house of cards, and a stiff breeze was about to hit the structure. "But why the sudden panic?" I asked, looking up from the spreadsheets. "He has been hiding this deficit for years. Why did Victoria ambush me in the courtyard today?" Reed picked up a digital tablet and tapped the screen. She turned the device toward me. The local news web page displayed a breaking story bulletin. "Local resident apprehended in federal wire fraud investigation." The mugshot sitting beneath the headline belonged to Dylan. "He was arrested 3 hours ago," Reed explained, her voice carrying a cold, clinical edge. "Federal agents raided his apartment. He orchestrated a fraudulent initial coin offering, essentially stealing money from online investors. His bail is set at $250,000. He is facing federal prison." The timeline snapped into brutal focus. Victoria ambushed me in the courtyard because she knew the authorities were closing in. She wanted my patent money to fund a frantic escape. When I denied her the cash, Harrison realized he had no safety net left. He required an immediate, staggering influx of liquid capital to hire a federal defense team for Dylan and keep Victoria from turning against him. He needed the investors at the upcoming country club gala to open their checkbooks. And he needed my pristine scientific reputation to convince them his firm was a secure investment. The following morning, my cell phone vibrated with an urgent calendar summons. It did not originate from a laboratory manager or a faculty advisor. The notification came directly from the Dean of Sciences. The subject line mandated my immediate presence in the administration building. I walked across the campus quad. The morning air carried a crisp, false sense of peace. The administration suite occupied the top floor of the oldest building on campus. The carpets felt thick under my shoes. The air smelled of expensive lemon polish and stale institutional power. I opened the heavy oak door to the private office of the dean. The dean sat behind a mahogany desk looking profoundly uncomfortable. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, refusing to meet my eyes. Seated in the leather guest chair opposite the desk was my father. Harrison wore a charcoal suit, tailored to hide the physical toll of his collapsing life. Deep lines carved brackets around his mouth. The skin beneath his eyes carried a bruised, exhausted tint. Yet his posture radiated a practiced, unyielding authority. He stood up when I entered the room. He offered a warm, paternal smile that did not reach his eyes. "Chloe," he said smoothly, "it is good to see you. You look well." I did not return the greeting. I stood near the door, my posture rigid. "Why am I here?" The dean cleared his throat. "Miss Morgan, your father requested a mediation session. He expressed deep concerns regarding the ethical allocation of university resources within the laboratory of Dr. Reed. As a prominent alumni donor, we take his concerns with the utmost gravity." I stared at the dean. "You cannot possibly entertain this fabrication. He possesses zero evidence of ethical misconduct." Harrison sighed, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "I do not want to pursue this formal complaint, Chloe. I really do not. I understand you and Dr. Reed are finalizing a lucrative diagnostic patent. It would be a tragedy if an external audit froze that research." The threat hung in the polished air. An external audit would freeze the laboratory accounts immediately. Our pathogen samples would degrade. The pharmaceutical licensing negotiations would collapse. Decades of meticulous epidemiological research would evaporate over a manufactured clerical dispute. Harrison was holding the entire legacy of my mentor hostage. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice remained flat, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my chest. Harrison buttoned his suit jacket. "I want my daughter to come home. I want you to attend the investor gala at the Scottsdale Country Club next week. I want you to deliver the keynote address. Tell my colleagues about your brilliant research. Tell them how your family supported your academic journey. We need to present a united front." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a single sheet of paper. He laid it on the edge of the mahogany desk. It was a printed contract. "A simple non-disclosure and appearance agreement," Harrison explained softly. "You sign this, promising to speak at the gala and speak highly of our firm. In exchange, I formally withdraw the ethics complaint. Dr. Reed keeps her funding. You keep your patent. Everyone walks away whole." I looked at the piece of paper. It was an extortion demand dressed in legal terminology. He needed me to stand on a stage and endorse a Ponzi scheme. He needed me to act as the credible bait so he could steal millions of dollars from his country club peers to pay a federal bail bondsman. If I refused, he would burn the career of Dr. Reed to the ground out of pure spite. He knew I valued loyalty. He weaponized my gratitude toward the woman who saved me from sleeping in a Honda Civic. I looked at the dean. He stared at his desk blotter. Academia functioned as a business, and the dean prioritized protecting the endowment over protecting a graduate student. No rescue was coming from the university bureaucracy. I walked toward the mahogany desk. The leather soles of my shoes made no sound on the thick carpet. I picked up the silver pen resting next to the document. Harrison smiled a genuine, triumphant expression. He believed he had broken the wild horse. He believed the 19-year-old girl who cried over a stolen bedroom had returned to submit to his authority. He believed his tailored suit and his country club tactics rendered him invincible. "I will sign it," I stated. "Excellent choice," Harrison whispered. I pressed the pen to the paper. I did not forge a signature this time. I wrote my name with precise, sharp letters. I handed the document back to him. "I will see you at the country club," I said. I turned and walked out of the office. I navigated the quiet hallways of the administration building. My pulse hammered a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. Harrison secured his keynote speaker. He secured his bait. He thought he built the perfect trap to save his failing empire. He failed to realize that the person walking into his trap carried the match to ignite the entire powder keg. The heavy oak door of the dean's office clicked shut behind me. I stood in the quiet, carpeted hallway of the administration building, listening to the muffled sound of Harrison's victorious laugh filtering through the wood paneling. He believed he secured his survival. He believed the signature I just pressed onto his extortion contract guaranteed my compliance. He thought he cornered a helpless graduate student. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I typed a single brief text message to Dr. Reed. "The bait is taken." I walked out of the building and into the stark Scottsdale sunlight. The heat felt clean, almost surgical. For 4 years, I carried the burden of my displacement quietly. I accepted the loss of my bedroom, the theft of my mother's life insurance, and the 11 nights I spent curled in the back seat of a Honda Civic. I buried the trauma beneath textbook chapters and laboratory microscopes. I convinced myself that surviving was sufficient revenge. But my father refused to let me survive in peace. He dragged my mentor into his crosshairs. He weaponized the university bureaucracy to protect a stepson facing federal fraud charges. He forced me back onto his playing field. The rules of engagement changed the moment my pen touched his contract. I was no longer playing defense. I drove directly to the North Scottsdale property. The southwestern-style walls offered their familiar, silent sanctuary. I found Dr. Reed sitting at the long wooden dining table. Her digital tablet, an open laptop, and a stack of legal pads covered the surface. She wore reading glasses, her silver hair pulled tight against her scalp. She looked up as I entered the kitchen. He withdrew the ethics complaint I stated, dropping my keys onto the counter. I signed the appearance agreement. I am the keynote speaker for his investor gala next Friday. Reed removed her glasses. The corners of her mouth twitched into a sharp, predatory smile. Excellent. He committed himself to the public stage. Now we ensure he cannot walk off of it. We possess the motive. We established the venue. We just needed the ammunition. A simple accusation from an estranged daughter would not dismantle a prominent insurance broker in front of his wealthy peers. To destroy a man whose entire existence relied on financial credibility, we needed a weapon forged from irrefutable data. "We require the primary ledger," I said, pulling a chair out from the table. "We know he is running a shadow accounting system to cover Dylan's crypto losses, but the commercial loan committee records you obtained only show the deficit. They do not prove the mechanical execution of the Ponzi scheme. We need to show exactly how he moves the premiums from the new clients to pay the old claims." Reed nodded, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the edge of her laptop. "Harrison employs a private accounting firm in Phoenix. They handle his regulatory filings. They are discreet, expensive, and legally bound by confidentiality agreements. We cannot subpoena those records without a formal law enforcement investigation, which we cannot trigger until after the gala, I reasoned. If we alert the authorities now, the federal agents will freeze his accounts quietly. He will hire a defense attorney, declare bankruptcy, and fade into comfortable obscurity. He will avoid the public humiliation he deserves. Then we bypass the accounting firm entirely," Reed countered smoothly. I looked at her. How Reed swiped her finger across the tablet screen, pulling up a digital directory. Before I dedicated my life to epidemiology, my first graduate degree focused on behavioral economics. Financial criminals are remarkably predictable. They never trust the people they pay to hide their crimes. They always maintain a personal, unvarnished copy of the true ledger to track their own theft. Harrison will not leave that document on a networked server. He will keep a physical copy. A safety deposit box, I suggested. Too heavily regulated, Reed dismissed, and it requires inconvenient banking hours. A man running a Ponzi scheme needs constant access to his numbers. He needs to know exactly how close he is to the edge of the cliff at any given moment. He keeps it at the office, I realized. Reed smiled. The Cole brokerage occupies the top floor of a commercial building downtown. The property is managed by a real estate holding company. The CEO of that holding company sits on the board of the Regional Medical Foundation with me. She picked up her cell phone. I watched my mentor, a woman known for her severe, uncompromising dedication to scientific ethics, dial the private number of a commercial real estate mogul. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Reed spoke in low, measured tones. She mentioned a potential grant allocation. She casually inquired about the security protocols for the downtown commercial property. When she ended the call, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place with terrifying precision. The custodial staff cleans the Cole brokerage offices every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, Reed explained, setting the phone down. The holding company employs a private contracting firm. The supervisor of that custodial crew owes a significant medical debt to the university hospital system, a debt I have the administrative authority to discharge. You are bribing a janitor to commit corporate espionage, I stated. The sheer audacity of the maneuver sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I am conducting field research, Reed corrected without a hint of irony. We are isolating a toxic pathogen. The following Thursday evening, I parked my Honda Civic 2 blocks away from the downtown commercial building. The streetlights flickered against the dark pavement. I sat in the driver's seat watching the glass entrance of the high-rise. At exactly 8:15, a white commercial van pulled up to the loading dock. A man wearing a gray uniform stepped out. He carried a heavy canvas bag. I waited. The minutes stretched into a tense, agonizing crawl. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. If the custodial supervisor failed, if Harrison installed secondary security cameras, the entire operation would collapse. At 8:45, the man emerged from the loading dock. He did not look around. He walked steadily toward the corner of the intersection, dropping a standard manila envelope into a public trash receptacle before turning and heading back toward his van. I waited until his taillights disappeared down the avenue. I exited my vehicle, walked to the receptacle, and retrieved the envelope. I returned to the southwestern-style house. Reed waited at the dining table. I tore the envelope open. Inside sat a thick stack of photocopied pages. The custodial supervisor located a locked filing cabinet in Harrison's private office. He picked the simple tumbler lock, copied the contents of the black leather ledger inside, and returned the original document before completing his shift. We spread the pages across the wooden table. The numbers did not lie. The ledger detailed a catastrophic, undeniable financial hemorrhage. Harrison systematically funneled the insurance premiums paid by his newest, most lucrative commercial clients directly into offshore digital wallets. The wallets belonged to Dylan. The ledger tracked the dates, the amounts, and the fraudulent claim numbers used to mask the transfers. My father built a massive illegal siphon to fund his stepson's crypto gambling addiction. And the ledger revealed something even more damning. Look at the column tracking the upcoming quarterly payouts. Reed pointed, her voice dropping to a whisper. I traced the numbers. The brokerage owed millions in legitimate insurance claims to local businesses by the end of the month. The escrow accounts were entirely empty. If he does not secure a massive influx of capital at this gala, I summarized, staring at the inescapable mathematics of his ruin, the state auditors will flag the missed payouts within 2 weeks. The firm will collapse. He is not just trying to save face, he is trying to avoid federal prison. We compiled the photocopied ledger pages. I added the forged bank transfer slip from 4 years ago, retrieving it from the fireproof box under my mattress. The document that initiated my nightmare sat perfectly aligned with the documents that would end his. I placed the entire stack into a clean, heavy manila folder. I sealed the clasp. The weapon was fully loaded. It was cold, factual, and legally lethal. I held the power to destroy the architect of my displacement. I held the evidence to send the man who told me to sleep in my car directly to a federal penitentiary. I placed the folder into my leather satchel. The investor gala was 48 hours away. The trap was set. But before I could walk onto that stage, my father issued one final arrogant demand, a demand that would force me to confront the ghost of my mother one last time. The manila folder holding the copied shadow ledger and the forged bank slip sat securely locked in Dr. Reed's filing cabinet. The architecture of my father's ruin was fully drafted. We possessed the weapon, the motive, and the venue. The Scottsdale Country Club Gala loomed on the horizon, promising a sudden, violent reordering of the social physics my father relied upon. But before I could walk onto that stage and deliver the killing blow, Harrison orchestrated one final excruciating performance. My phone vibrated with a calendar notification. Harrison scheduled a mandatory appearance at the old house. The demand arrived wrapped in polite corporate phrasing. He required a brief family photography session. The images were intended for the glossy promotional brochures distributed to the elite investors attending the gala. He needed visual proof of the devoted, brilliant daughter he claimed to have raised. I did not argue. I accepted the invitation. Denying him the photo op might trigger suspicion, and a successful ambush requires the target to feel entirely secure until the trap snaps shut. I drove my Honda Civic through the familiar streets of my old neighborhood. The sprawling southwestern-style home sat behind manicured desert landscaping. The oppressive heat of the afternoon sun baked the asphalt. I turned onto the driveway I once considered my own. The midnight blue Ford pickup truck occupied its usual dominant position. I parked on the street. The front door opened before I reached the flagstone porch. Harrison stood in the entryway wearing a casual polo shirt that probably cost $300. He offered a wide, practiced smile designed for an invisible audience. "Chloe," he said smoothly, stepping aside to let me enter. "Perfect timing. The photographer is setting up in the living room." I crossed the threshold. The air conditioning hit my skin, carrying the scent of Victoria's expensive floral diffusers. The interior of the house bore no resemblance to the sanctuary my mother painstakingly decorated. The vibrant, warm southwestern textiles were gone. The space felt sterile, dominated by imported leather furniture and oversized abstract art that meant nothing. I walked past the living room archway. Dylan slouched on a leather sectional sofa, staring at a massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall. The rhythmic gunfire of a video game echoed through the house. He wore athletic shorts and the heavy gold luxury watch. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge my presence. He occupied the physical space of a son while facing federal fraud charges, insulated by a stolen inheritance. The photographer, a young man adjusting lighting umbrellas near the fireplace, gestured for Harrison. "Give me 2 minutes." Harrison told me, checking his reflection in a hallway mirror. "Victoria is upstairs finishing her makeup. Why do you not go tell her we are ready?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. The clinical detachment I mastered in the epidemiology lab settled over my nervous system. I treated the house like a contaminated biohazard zone. I moved through the hallway, registering the physical layout without allowing the memories to attach themselves to my emotional core. I climbed the hardwood staircase. The steps creaked in the familiar pattern I memorized as a child. I reached the second-floor landing. The door to my old bedroom stood wide open. I paused. I looked inside the room where my mother spent her final summer painting desert wildflowers along the baseboards. The walls were now painted a flat, industrial gray. A massive computer server hummed in the corner. Empty energy drink cans cluttered a modern glass desk. The murals were gone, painted over with careless, heavy brush strokes. The physical evidence of my mother's love had been erased to accommodate a boy who treated the house like a hotel. I swallowed the dry lump forming in my throat. I turned away from the doorway and continued down the hall toward the master suite. The door was ajar. I stopped just outside the threshold. Victoria sat at a newly installed mirrored vanity table. She wore a silk dressing gown, applying a final layer of setting powder to her cheekbones. She hummed a quiet, tuneless melody. My eyes drifted past her reflection. I focused on the polished surface of the vanity table. Sitting next to an array of designer perfume bottles was a familiar dark wooden box. It featured intricate carvings of hummingbirds along the lid. It was my mother's jewelry box. The box Harrison swore he lost during the interior renovations 4 years ago. The box was open. Resting on a velvet display pad next to the box was a necklace. My breath caught in my chest. A sudden, piercing cold radiated from my sternum. My mother possessed one sacred heirloom. It was a heavy, magnificent piece of traditional Hopi and Hispanic silverwork passed down through 3 generations of women in her family. It featured thick, hand-hammered silver plates inlaid with rough, natural turquoise stones. It carried the weight of our ancestry. It carried the physical memory of the women who survived the harsh desert before us. My mother wore it on her wedding day. She promised to give it to me when I graduated from university. I stared at the object on Victoria's vanity. The rough, natural turquoise stones remained, but the traditional heavy silver work was gone. Victoria had taken the heirloom to a jeweler. She ordered the historic silver plates melted down. She instructed the jeweler to extract the turquoise stones and reset them into a thin, generic, modern platinum choker. The piece now looked like something purchased from a high-end boutique in a coastal city. It looked sterile. It looked compliant. She stripped the heritage from the stones so she could wear them to the country club without looking too ethnic. She brutalized my mother's legacy to match a designer evening gown. The erasure was absolute. Harrison took my physical space. He stole my financial future, but Victoria took the very history of the woman who gave me life, and she melted it down for social currency. Victoria finished applying her makeup. She turned toward the doorway and jumped, slightly startled by my silent presence. "Chloe!" she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "I did not hear you walk up the stairs." I did not move. I did not look at her face. I kept my eyes locked on the desecrated turquoise stones resting on the velvet pad. Victoria followed my gaze. A brief flicker of hesitation crossed her features, but her country club arrogance quickly masked it. She picked up the platinum choker. "Do you like it?" she asked, holding the necklace against her collarbone. "The stones are quite striking. Harrison found this old, clunky piece of silver jewelry in a box in the garage. It was hopelessly outdated, way too heavy to wear in public. I had my jeweler repurpose the stones. It feels so much more elegant now, do you not think?" The sheer, staggering audacity of the statement crystallized the final layer of my resolve. The clinical detachment shifted into absolute ice. I felt no anger. Anger is erratic. Anger causes mistakes. I felt the cold, precise focus of a scientist preparing to drop a toxic sample into an incinerator. "It is very elegant," I said. My voice did not shake. It carried the smooth, flat tone of a dial tone. "It suits you perfectly." Victoria smiled, pleased by the validation. She fastened the clasp behind her neck. The turquoise stones rested against her skin, a stolen legacy masquerading as a modern accessory. "Let us go downstairs," she instructed, tightening the belt of her silk robe. "The photographer is waiting. We need to look like a happy family for these brochures. Harrison is counting on it." I stepped back into the hallway to let her pass. I followed her down the wooden staircase. I stood in the living room next to the man who forged my signature and the woman wearing my mother's melted history. I smiled for the camera. I angled my shoulders precisely as the photographer directed. I allowed Harrison to place a heavy paternal hand on my shoulder. I played the role of the defeated, compliant daughter with flawless execution. I did not flinch when the camera flashed. I did not pull away from my father's grip. I let them capture the illusion of their perfect, wealthy family. They needed the photographs to convince the investors that their foundation was secure. They needed the glossy brochures to sell the lie. I gave them exactly what they wanted. I handed them the rope they would use to hang themselves. The photography session concluded. Harrison walked me to the front door. He offered that same hollow smile. "I will see you on Friday night, Chloe," he said smoothly. "Wear something appropriate. The entire commercial loan committee will be in attendance." I walked to my Honda Civic. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel. I looked at the Southwestern-style house one last time. The stage was meticulously set. The bait was swallowed. The weapon was loaded and waiting in a locked filing cabinet in North Scottsdale. The Scottsdale Country Club Gala was 4 days away. My father thought he was hosting a financial rescue mission. He did not realize he mailed out invitations to his own execution. The morning of the Scottsdale Country Club Gala arrived with a sharp, cloudless intensity. I sat in the epidemiology laboratory, running a final sequence on the centrifuge. The quiet hum of the machinery offered a familiar rhythm. Tonight, the sterile environment of the lab would be replaced by the opulent, heavily perfumed atmosphere of my father's social circle. I finalized my data logs, logged out of the secure server, and began sterilizing my workstation. The heavy fire doors pushed open. A campus courier wearing a gray polo shirt walked into the room holding a large, flat cardboard box stamped with the logo of a mid-tier department store. "Chloe Morgan," the courier asked, glancing at a clipboard. I stripped off my latex gloves. "Yes, sign here, please." I signed the electronic pad and took possession of the box. It felt surprisingly light. Dr. Reed, who was reviewing grant proposals at the adjacent table, looked up over the rims of her reading glasses. I placed the box on the stainless steel counter and broke the adhesive seal. Inside, folded beneath a layer of cheap tissue paper, lay a dress. It was a shapeless, conservative garment in a dull shade of navy blue. The fabric felt synthetic and stiff. It was the kind of dress purchased off a clearance rack for a junior high school orchestra concert. It projected an image of quiet, unremarkable subservience. It was an outfit designed to blend into the background to ensure the wearer did not outshine the people standing next to them. A small cream-colored envelope rested on top of the collar. I pulled the card out. The handwriting belonged to Harrison. The loops and angles matched the forged signature on the bank transfer slip sitting in the manila folder back at the Southwestern-style house. The note contained 4 words. "Wear this. Look grateful." I stared at the ink. The psychology behind the gesture was incredibly transparent. Harrison secured my appearance through extortion. But physical presence was not enough for his ego. He needed to dictate my physical presentation. He needed his wealthy investors to see a modest, compliant daughter who owed her entire existence to her benevolent father. If I walked onto that stage wearing the armor of a successful scientist, I might steal the spotlight. If I wore this cheap, shapeless uniform, I remained a prop in his performance. I picked up the dress. I walked across the laboratory to the industrial biohazard disposal bin. I pressed the foot pedal. The heavy plastic lid opened. I dropped the dress and the note into the dark interior. The lid snapped shut with a hollow, satisfying thud. Reed watched the entire sequence. She returned to her grant proposals without offering a single comment. The silence spoke volumes. We were not going to the country club to play the roles assigned to us. We were going to direct the final act. At 7 o'clock that evening, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room of the North Scottsdale house. I did not wear navy blue synthetic fabric. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit. I purchased it 2 weeks prior, using the first installment of my patent licensing advance. The lines of the blazer were razor sharp, the fabric draped with effortless precision. It was not a dress designed for a grateful daughter. It was armor forged for an executive executioner. I picked up the heavy manila folder from the desk. It contained the photocopied pages of Harrison's shadow ledger, tracking the millions he siphoned into Dylan's offshore crypto wallets. It contained the forged bank transfer slip. It contained the exact mathematics of a federal crime. I slid the folder into a slim, black leather portfolio case. Dr. Reed waited in the kitchen. She wore a severe, elegant black evening gown. She looked like a judge arriving to deliver a capital sentence. "Are we ready?" Reed asked, her voice calm and measured. I tightened my grip on the portfolio case. "Yes." We drove to the Scottsdale Country Club in her Volvo. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the McDowell Mountains in bruised shades of purple and dark orange. The entrance to the club featured a winding driveway lined with imported palm trees and soft, recessed lighting. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open the doors of arriving luxury sedans and European sports cars. I handed the keys to a valet and walked through the heavy, brass-handled double doors. The ballroom was a masterpiece of manufactured excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 200 guests. Waiters circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and miniature crab cakes. A string quartet played classical arrangements in the corner, barely audible over the hum of practiced, wealthy conversations. The air smelled of expensive cologne, roasted tenderloin, and desperation. I scanned the room. The social hierarchy of the Scottsdale business elite mapped itself out clearly across the floor plan. The minor players clustered near the open bars. The power brokers commanded the center of the room. And in the very epicenter of the most important cluster stood my father. Harrison wore a custom tuxedo. He held a glass of dark red wine, his free hand gesturing expansively as he spoke to a tall, silver-haired man. I recognized the silver-haired man from the financial dossiers I reviewed in the library. It was Richard Sterling. Sterling managed the largest private equity fund in the state. He was the white whale Harrison desperately needed to harpoon. If Sterling wrote a check tonight, the Ponzi scheme survived another quarter. If Sterling walked away, the state auditors would dismantle the coal brokerage by the end of the month. Harrison laughed at something Sterling said, clapping the older man on the shoulder. It was a flawless performance of regional dominance. A few feet away from the men, Victoria held court with a group of wives. She wore an emerald green silk gown that swept the marble floor. And resting against her collarbone, catching the light of the chandeliers, was my mother's heirloom. The brutalized, reset turquoise stones gleamed against the sterile platinum chain. She touched the necklace, frequently drawing attention to it, parading the stolen history as a trophy of her own social ascent. I felt a cold pressure settle behind my ribs. The clinical detachment locked into place. I did not see a father and his girlfriend. I saw two targets standing on the x-axis. Dr. Reed and I moved into the room. We did not head for the bar. We did not engage in small talk. We walked with deliberate, unhurried steps toward table 1. A few heads turned as we navigated the crowd. The tailored charcoal suit stood out sharply against the sea of predictable evening gowns. A hushed whisper rippled through a group of hospital administrators who recognized Dr. Reed. Her presence elevated my status immediately. I was not just Harrison Cole's daughter. I was the protégé of one of the most formidable scientific minds in the state. Harrison noticed the shift in the room's attention. He turned away from Sterling, his eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, his polished smile faltered. He registered the charcoal suit. He registered the absence of the cheap, compliant dress he sent to the lab. He registered Dr. Reed standing beside me like a silent vanguard. The calculation flashed behind his eyes. He realized I broke the script. But a narcissist never abandons a performance in front of an audience. He quickly recovered, stretching his smile wider, stepping away from Sterling to intercept me before I reached the table. Chloe Harrison announced, his voice projecting loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "You made it!" He opened his arms for an embrace. I did not step into it. I extended my right hand. Harrison stared at my hand for a brief, uncomfortable moment before grasping it. His palm felt slick with nervous sweat. He pulled me slightly closer, dropping his voice to a harsh territorial whisper, meant only for my ears. "What are you wearing?" he hissed, his grip tightening. "Where is the dress I sent you?" "I disposed of it," I replied, my tone flat. The synthetic fabric presented a fire hazard in the laboratory. His jaw clenched. A flash of genuine, unfiltered anger darkened his features. He glanced at Dr. Reed, who offered him a cold, empty smile. Harrison realized he could not discipline me in the center of the ballroom without shattering his facade. "We will discuss your wardrobe choices later," Harrison murmured, stepping back and re-engaging his public volume. "Let me introduce you to someone very important." He pivoted, placing a heavy hand on the center of my back, guiding me toward Richard Sterling. "Richard!" Harrison boomed, his confidence returning. "This is the brilliant young woman I was telling you about, my daughter Chloe. She is finalizing a biomedical patent that is going to change the face of epidemiological diagnostics." Sterling turned, looking at me with calculating, intelligent eyes. He extended a hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Chloe. Your father speaks of your academic achievements constantly. He tells me he funded your entire research journey. It is rare to see such dedicated family support these days." I felt the weight of the lie settle over the conversation. Harrison told this billionaire that he bankrolled my success. He used the $32,000 he stole from my mother's grave to buy Dylan a truck, while claiming he used his wealth to build my career. He was weaving my legitimate intellectual property into the fabric of his Ponzi scheme. I looked at Sterling. I looked at the dark red wine in Harrison's glass. I looked at the stolen turquoise resting on Victoria's neck. "He has been very instrumental in my journey, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice perfectly smooth. "I am eager to share the exact details of his contributions during my speech." Harrison beamed, missing the lethal subtext entirely. He patted my shoulder. A waiter chimed a small crystal bell near the podium at the front of the room. The string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded as the guests began moving toward their assigned tables. Harrison leaned in close. He tapped the expensive face of his custom watch. "It is time," he whispered. "Go wait by the stage. Sell the story, Chloe. Remember what happens to your mentor if you forget your lines." I nodded once. I gripped the leather portfolio case containing his federal crimes. The trap was fully sprung, the jaws locked tight. But my father failed to understand the fundamental mechanics of the snare. He believed he caught a mouse. He did not realize he locked himself inside a cage with a predator. The ballroom quieted as the waiters retreated to the perimeter. I stood in the heavy shadows cast by the velvet curtains flanking the main stage. The black leather portfolio case rested against my right hip. Inside its slim compartments lay the photocopied ledger, the forged bank transfer slip, and the exact coordinates of my father's impending ruin. Harrison ascended the 3 carpeted steps to the mahogany podium. He moved with a practiced predatory grace. He reached the microphone, adjusted the knot of his silk tie, and let his gaze sweep across the 200 faces watching him. He allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to establish total command over the room. "Thank you all for joining us tonight." Harrison began, his voice deep, resonant, and expertly modulated. He opened with a brief, self-deprecating joke about the local golf course earning a ripple of warm laughter from the crowd. He acknowledged Richard Sterling by name, thanking the Commercial Loan Committee for their continued partnership. He played the role of the humble, successful local businessman with terrifying perfection. Then the tone of his address shifted. The jovial country club persona melted away, replaced by a somber, reflective gravitas. "We gather here this evening to discuss capital." Harrison projected, leaning slightly forward, gripping the edges of the podium. "We discuss market trends, equity returns, and risk management. But anyone who has spent a decade building a firm from the ground up knows that true wealth does not reside in an escrow account. True wealth resides in legacy. It resides in the family we build and the sacrifices we endure to protect them." I watched him from the shadows, dissecting the anatomy of his lie. He was weaving a narrative designed to exploit the fundamental vulnerabilities of his audience. These wealthy investors wanted to place their money with a man of character. They wanted a moral anchor. Harrison was offering them a mirage. He lowered his head for a fraction of a second, simulating the heavy burden of past grief. "Many of you know I lost my first wife to cancer." He continued, his voice adopting a softer, fragile cadence. "It was the darkest chapter of my life. I found myself a single father tasked with guiding a young girl through the most critical years of her development. It is a terrifying responsibility to realize you are the only safety net your child possesses." My fingers tightened around the handle of the portfolio. The hypocrisy burned the oxygen in my lungs. He dared to use the phrase safety net. He took the only safety net my dying mother constructed, forged my signature, and used it to buy a lifted truck for his stepson. Harrison gestured toward the front table. "But a man does not survive the dark alone. I was blessed to find a partner who helped rebuild the foundation of our home. Victoria, thank you for being my rock." Victoria beamed from her seat in the front row. She tilted her chin upward, allowing the crystal chandeliers to catch the light reflecting off her throat. Her manicured fingers drifted up to brush against the reset turquoise stones. She wore the desecrated history of my ancestors while soaking in the applause of a room full of strangers. She played the devoted stepmother with the same hollow expertise Harrison utilized at the podium. The applause faded. Harrison turned his attention back to the center of the room. He reached the climax of his fiction, the pivot to my scientific career. When you endure a profound tragedy, Harrison proclaimed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, you learn to prioritize what truly matters. When my wife passed away, I made a silent vow. I promised I would provide every available resource to ensure my daughter reached her maximum potential. I knew she possessed a rare, brilliant mind, but brilliance requires cultivation. It requires financial stability. He paused, letting his gaze meet the eyes of the key investors. I always pushed her to be fiercely independent. He lied smoothly, delivering the sentence without a single tremor of guilt. I wanted her to know the value of hard work, but I also knew the burden of higher education. I sacrificed everything to fund her tuition. I financed her laboratory research so she could focus her entire intellect on curing diseases, rather than worrying about paying rent or finding a place to sleep. The sheer breathtaking scale of the fabrication hit me like a physical wave. He stood under a spotlight, claiming he funded my tuition, while the bank slip proving he stole $32,000 from my account rested in my hand. He claimed he shielded me from worrying about a place to sleep, while the memory of my spine aching against the back seat of a Honda Civic remained permanently etched into my muscles. He spun a fairy tale of parental sacrifice to mask a reality of staggering neglect and federal fraud, and the audience believed every single word. I watched Richard Sterling nod in solemn approval. I saw prominent local business owners raise their glasses in silent tribute to my father's supposed generosity. Harrison provided them with the perfect protagonist, a dedicated patriarch building a regional business while funding a biomedical pioneer. It was an irresistible investment narrative. If Harrison Cole could successfully guide a daughter toward a groundbreaking medical patent, he could certainly manage their commercial equity funds. The trap was set perfectly. If I stepped onto the stage and confirmed his story, Richard Sterling would sign a check tomorrow morning. The offshore cryptocurrency debts accumulated by Dylan would be erased. The shadow ledger would balance. The state auditors would find nothing amiss. Harrison would survive, and the false reality he constructed would become permanent. Harrison stepped back from the microphone. He opened his arms, turning his body toward the velvet curtains where I stood concealed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced, his voice climbing to a triumphant crescendo, "I want to introduce you to the pride of my life. She is a dedicated researcher, a pioneer in epidemiological diagnostics, and my brilliant, beautiful daughter. Please welcome Chloe Morgan." The ballroom erupted. 200 wealthy investors stood to their feet. The applause sounded like a torrential downpour hitting a tin roof. It was deafening heavy and saturated with expectation. They clapped for a fictional character. They cheered for a beautiful daughter who did not exist. I stood in the shadows listening to the roar of the crowd. My father looked at me, a tight, commanding smile fixed on his face. His eyes conveyed a clear, undeniable threat. He held the academic career of Dr. Reed hostage. He held my biomedical patent hostage. He believed the weight of the audience and the threat of institutional ruin would force my compliance. He thought the 19-year-old girl he banished to a campus parking structure would walk out into the light and obediently recite the lines he wrote for her. I adjusted my grip on the black leather portfolio. The smooth surface felt cool against my palm. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtain. The bright stage lights blinded me for a fraction of a second before my vision adjusted. I walked toward the mahogany podium, my tailored charcoal suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the extravagant backdrop of the gala. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. The applause sustained its roaring volume. Harrison reached out his hand, ready to pull me into a paternal embrace for the cameras flashing at the back of the room. The entire room waited for me to play my part. They waited for me to validate the architect of my displacement. They waited to see if I would sacrifice my own truth to protect the mentor who saved my life, or if I would burn the entire building down. The applause crested and began to fade as I reached the mahogany podium. Harrison stepped forward, extending his arms for the anticipated paternal embrace. I did not step into it. I bypassed him entirely, moving directly to the microphone stand. I set the black leather portfolio on the smooth wooden surface of the podium. The sharp click of the metal clasps hitting the wood carried clearly through the amplified sound system. Harrison dropped his arms. His polished smile remained, but his eyes narrowed. He took a subtle step back, attempting to maintain his casual posture. But the sudden disruption in the choreography sent a ripple of unease through his stance. I looked out at the 200 guests. The faces of the local elite stared back at me, waiting for a story of devotion and academic triumph. I found Richard Sterling seated at table 1. I found Victoria in the front row, her hand resting delicately near the reset turquoise stones at her throat. I slipped my left hand into the pocket of my blazer, my fingers closing around the jagged metal teeth of the key belonging to my 2008 Honda Civic. The cold brass grounded me. I leaned toward the microphone. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I adopted the flat, precise cadence I used when dissecting biohazards under a laboratory hood. "My father is right about independence," I began. The acoustic bounce of the ballroom amplified my voice, sending it echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Harrison nodded slowly, offering a reassuring look to the audience. He assumed I was finding my rhythm, preparing to deliver the prescribed endorsement. He taught me the true value of independence exactly 4 years ago. I continued keeping my tone perfectly level. He taught me this lesson on a Tuesday afternoon in June when I finished my freshman finals and called him to say I was coming home. The room remained quiet, the guests anticipating a heartwarming anecdote about tough love and early curfews. He taught me independence when he informed me he gutted my bedroom to create a gaming office for his new girlfriend's 20-year-old son. He taught me independence when he changed the locks on the front door, suggested I sleep on the living room sofa, and then hung up the phone. The silence in the ballroom shifted. It transformed from polite anticipation into a sudden, confused static. A woman at table 4 lowered her wine glass. A man near the bar stopped mid-conversation, turning his head toward the stage. Harrison froze. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed. His jaw slackened. He took a half step toward the podium, his hand raising slightly caught between the instinct to silence the microphone and the terror of creating a public scene. "I did not sleep on the sofa," I stated, my gaze sweeping across the front row. "I lived in a Honda Civic parked in Structure C on the university campus. I slept across the back seat. I survived on peanut butter crackers and washed my hair with pink industrial soap in a basement restroom for 11 days. The silence turned absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that occurs when oxygen is violently sucked out of a closed space. The 200 millionaires stopped breathing. "Chloe!" Harrison hissed, his voice dropping to a panicked, guttural whisper behind me. "What are you doing?" "Stop talking." I ignored him. I opened the black leather portfolio resting on the podium. "My father stood on this stage 5 minutes ago and claimed he sacrificed his wealth to fund my biomedical research," I said, looking directly at Richard Sterling. "He claimed he provided the financial stability necessary for me to pursue my patent. That statement is a mathematical impossibility." I reached into the portfolio. I pulled out the crisp, photocopied bank transfer slip. My mother spent her final months in a hospice bed arranging a $32,000 life insurance policy. She intended those funds to guarantee my college tuition. The money sat in a joint savings account. 3 weeks after I began sleeping in my car, that account was drained to a balance of $14. I held the document up. The harsh stage lighting illuminated the ink. "This is the wire authorization slip I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the back of the room. It details a transfer of $31,985 to a local automotive dealership. My father forged my signature on this document to bypass the withdrawal limits. He stole the money a dying woman left for her daughter's education, and he used it to purchase a lifted midnight blue pickup truck for his stepson." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Victoria clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with sudden naked horror. She shrunk back into her chair as the people sitting at her table slowly turned their heads to stare at her. Harrison moved. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging into the fabric of my suit jacket. His grip felt desperate, brutal. "Turn off the microphone," he commanded, his voice tight with raw panic. "I will ruin Dr. Reed. I will destroy your career. I swear to God, Chloe, I will end you." I did not flinch. I did not pull my arm away. I simply turned my head and looked at him. The man who terrified me for 4 years suddenly looked small. The tailored suit hung on a hollow frame. The country club arrogance evaporated, leaving nothing but a cornered, terrified fraud. "You already tried to end me," I replied quietly. "You failed." I turned back to the microphone, speaking directly into it, so the entire room heard my next sentence. "Please remove your hand from my arm." "Harrison!" The amplified command cracked like a whip. Harrison flinched instinctively, releasing his grip as if the fabric burned his skin. He stumbled backward, his eyes darting frantically across the sea of faces watching him. He saw the disgust registering on the features of the men he played golf with. He saw the judgment solidifying on the faces of the commercial loan committee members. The social physics of the room inverted in less than 60 seconds. He was no longer the benevolent patriarch. He was a predator exposed under a halogen spotlight. But public humiliation was not the objective. I did not stand on this stage merely to correct his family fiction. I came to execute a corporate demolition. The truth about my displacement destroyed his social credibility. But a man like Harrison could always find a new country club. To ensure he never operated again, I needed to sever his financial arteries. I placed the forged bank slip back onto the podium. I reached deeper into the portfolio case and extracted the thick stack of documents provided by the bribed custodial supervisor, the shadow ledger. "My father is a thief," I continued, my voice steady. Relentless. But stealing from a 19-year-old girl is a minor offense compared to what he is doing to the people in this room. I picked up the first page of the shadow ledger. "He invited you here tonight under the guise of an investment opportunity. He needs your capital to expand his brokerage. He told you his firm is healthy. He is lying." I looked directly at the lead investor seated at table 1. "Mr. Sterling," I addressed the silver-haired man, "you manage the largest private equity fund in this state. You are considering a massive capital injection into the coal brokerage. Before you sign that check, I strongly advise you to review the internal accounting documents my father keeps locked in a private filing cabinet on the top floor of his commercial office building." Harrison let out a strangled, breathless sound. He recognized the documents in my hand. His knees visibly buckled, forcing him to grab the edge of the velvet curtain to remain standing. "These pages contain his shadow ledger," I declared, holding the stack of papers up for the room to see. "They detail a systemic multi-year Ponzi scheme. He is taking the insurance premiums paid by his newest commercial clients and diverting them into offshore unregulated cryptocurrency wallets to cover the catastrophic trading debts accumulated by his stepson. The escrow accounts meant to pay your legitimate claims are entirely empty." Chaos erupted. The polite, hushed atmosphere of the gala shattered. Chairs scraped violently against the marble floor as several men stood up simultaneously. A cacophony of raised voices filled the ballroom. Investors shouted questions at each other. Cell phones materialized as attendees scrambled to call their financial advisors and legal counsel. The orchestra abandoned their instruments. I did not wait for the noise to subside. I stepped away from the microphone. I gathered the black leather portfolio. I walked down the 3 carpeted steps, leaving Harrison clinging to the curtain, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his exposure. I navigated the frantic crowd. The guests parted for me, stepping aside as if I carried a contagious pathogen. I reached table 1. Richard Sterling stood behind his chair. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying fury. He did not look at my father. He looked at me. I handed him the manila folder containing the shadow ledger and the forged bank slip. "Do not invest your money where he invested mine," I told him. Sterling took the folder. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page of the diverted escrow funds. His jaw tightened. He snapped the folder shut, turned on his heel, and walked briskly toward the exit without uttering a single word. His departure signaled the collapse of the dam. But I was not finished. The financial execution was complete. Now I needed to address the cultural theft. I needed to reclaim the final piece of my mother's legacy before I walked out of the building. The departure of Richard Sterling triggered a sudden synchronized exodus. The prominent investors, the commercial loan officers, the city councilmen, they all pushed away from their tables. The clatter of fine china and the scrape of expensive chairs against marble filled the air. No one wanted to be photographed near the blast radius of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. The panicked retreat resembled passengers abandoning a sinking cruise ship, but instead of lifeboats, they scrambled for the valet stand. I stood near the edge of the fleeing crowd. The adrenaline that propelled me through the speech began to recede, leaving a cold, sharp clarity in its wake. The primary objective was achieved. The coal brokerage was dead. Harrison's financial credibility evaporated the moment Sterling opened that folder. The state auditors would arrive at his office by Monday morning. Federal agents would likely follow by Wednesday. But a tactical retreat requires securing all critical assets before abandoning the battlefield. I turned my attention to the front row. The tables near the stage were largely abandoned, the guests having scattered to the exits. Only one figure remained seated. Victoria sat frozen in her chair. Her emerald green silk gown pooled around her on the floor. Her flawless makeup looked stark against the bloodless pallor of her skin. She stared at the empty space where the crowd used to be, her mind failing to process the sudden violent evaporation of her social standing. Harrison remained near the podium, surrounded by a few angry shouting creditors, demanding immediate answers. He was trapped, frantically trying to weave a new lie to plug a hole the size of the McDowell Mountains. He could not protect her. He could not protect himself. I walked slowly back toward the stage, my tailored charcoal suit brushing against abandoned chairs. The string quartet had long since fled, leaving only the chaotic echoes of the ruined gala. Victoria saw me approaching. Her eyes widened. The arrogant country club facade she wore an hour ago was entirely gone. She looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had closed. She instinctively brought both hands up to her throat, covering the reset turquoise stones resting against her collarbone. She remembered the ambush in the courtyard. She remembered the venomous insult she hurled at me when I refused to fund her escape. Now the power dynamic was permanently inverted. "Take it off," I commanded. My voice did not rise above conversational volume, but it cut through the surrounding noise with surgical precision. Victoria trembled. She pressed her manicured fingers tighter against her neck. "Chloe, please. You do not understand. He made me wear it tonight. He said it projected the right image." "Do not attempt to negotiate," I stated, stepping closer. "You took a sacred piece of Hopi silverwork, a piece that belonged to 3 generations of women in my family. You took it to a jeweler and ordered it melted down because the heritage did not match your aesthetic. You stripped the history from those stones so you could play dress-up in front of these people. Take it off now." Her breath hitched. She looked toward the stage, searching for Harrison. But Harrison was surrounded by 3 furious men waving cell phones, screaming about missing escrow funds. No rescue was coming. Victoria's hands shook violently as she reached behind her neck. She fumbled with the delicate platinum clasp. Her pristine acrylic nails hindered her movement. She struggled for 10 agonizing seconds before the clasp finally gave way. The necklace fell into her lap. She picked it up and held it out, her eyes fixed on the marble floor. I reached out and took the necklace. The metal felt cold. The turquoise stones, brutalized and ripped from their traditional setting, still carried the weight of my mother's memory. I gripped the chain tightly in my fist. I did not thank her. I did not offer a final cutting remark. Silence is the ultimate display of dominance over a narcissist. I turned my back on Victoria and began the long walk toward the exit. I passed table 4 where half-eaten filet mignon rested on fine china. I walked past the champagne towers, now ignored and abandoned. The valet lobby was a scene of absolute chaos. Angry guests shouted at the attendants, demanding their luxury vehicles immediately. I bypassed the crowd and walked directly to Dr. Reed. She stood near the coat check, observing the panic with the detached fascination of a scientist watching a fascinating chemical reaction. She looked at my clenched fist. "You retrieved the stones." I nodded. "I will have a silversmith reconstruct the original setting. It will take time, but the foundation remains intact." Reed offered a rare, genuine smile. A fitting metaphor. "Are you ready to leave?" "Yes." We walked out through the heavy brass doors. The cool night air hit my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. I handed my ticket to a frantic valet. He retrieved my 2008 Honda Civic. The dented, faded car pulled up alongside a line of waiting European sports sedans. I opened the driver's side door. I looked back at the Scottsdale Country Club. Through the large glass windows, I could see the chaos continuing to unfold. I saw Harrison break away from the crowd of creditors, his face red, his tie loosened. He stared through the glass, watching me slide into the driver's seat of the car I slept in 4 years ago. He lost everything in less than 15 minutes: the business, the reputation, the girlfriend, the freedom. He built an empire on stolen money and lies. And I triggered the controlled demolition. I inserted the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then caught humming with reliable, persistent energy. "Doctor." Reed followed in her Volvo. We drove down the winding, palm tree-lined driveway, leaving the wreckage of my father's life in the rearview mirror. The drive back to the North Scottsdale Southwestern-style house was quiet. I rolled the window down, letting the desert wind rush through the cabin. The scent of dry dust and sagebrush filled my lungs. The crushing weight I carried since the afternoon I was locked out of my bedroom finally lifted. The equation was balanced. The predator was neutralized. But the fallout of a federal financial collapse is rarely swift. The bureaucratic machinery moves slowly, grinding its targets down over months of agonizing legal maneuvers. I did not need to witness the daily agony of Harrison's ruin. The local news cycle provided all the necessary updates. The following Monday, the State Insurance Commission suspended the coal brokerage license pending a comprehensive audit. The story made the front page of the local business section. By Wednesday, the federal authorities moved. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed a search warrant on Harrison's downtown commercial office. News helicopters broadcast the footage of agents carrying dozens of cardboard boxes out of the building. The shadow ledger provided the roadmap, and the federal prosecutors followed it flawlessly. Dillon's bail was revoked when the judge learned the funds used to secure his release were tied to a separate, ongoing federal Ponzi scheme investigation. He was transferred to a federal holding facility in Colorado, and Victoria, true to her predictable nature, executed her escape plan. When the authorities froze Harrison's personal and business accounts, her access to the financial reservoir vanished. She packed her designer luggage, abandoned the house in North Scottsdale, and disappeared. She did not attend Harrison's preliminary hearings. She did not offer a statement of support. She simply evaporated the moment the money ran dry. Harrison was left entirely alone. He faced multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. The local business community, the men he played golf with, the men he tried to defraud at the gala, severed all ties. They treated him like an active contagion. He lost his firm, his home, his stepson, and his girlfriend. He was reduced to the sum of his crimes. I tracked these developments from the quiet sanctuary of the epidemiology laboratory. My patent licensing agreement cleared the final legal hurdles. The initial payout secured my financial independence permanently. I moved out of Dr. Reed's guest room and purchased a small, quiet home in the foothills of the McDowell Mountains. I established an annual university housing grant for displaced undergraduate students, ensuring no other teenager would ever have to choose between their education and sleeping in a campus parking structure. I built a new life entirely on my own terms. The trauma of the past transformed into the foundation of my future. I no longer looked over my shoulder. I no longer checked the locks on my doors twice. The threat was eliminated. 4 years passed since the night of the Scottsdale Country Club Gala. The story should have ended there. The villain was punished, the hero achieved success, and the social order was restored. The narrative arc was complete, but reality rarely adheres to a clean cinematic conclusion. The ghosts of our past often wait until we feel entirely secure before making one final desperate attempt to haunt us. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early May. I was preparing to walk across the university stage to receive my doctorate in epidemiology. The culmination of nearly a decade of relentless academic pursuit was hours away. I stood in my office adjusting the heavy velvet folds of my academic regalia. My cell phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I normally ignored unlisted calls, but the university logistics coordinator promised a call regarding the ceremony seating arrangements. I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I answered. The line was quiet for a long moment. I heard the faint, distinct sound of an automated recording playing in the background. It was a familiar, sterile voice associated with correctional facility telecommunications. Chloe. The voice was rough, degraded by years of institutional air and profound defeat. It lacked the smooth, practiced resonance of the insurance broker who commanded ballrooms. It was the voice of the man who possessed absolutely nothing. It was Harrison. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the hollow, defeated sound of the man who once commanded ballrooms. He said my name again. The pronunciation lacked the polished, theatrical resonance of the insurance broker who charmed country club investors. It carried the desperate, ragged scrape of an inmate holding a plastic receiver. I did not speak. I did not demand an explanation or offer a cutting remark. I pulled the device away from my face and pressed the red button on the screen. The digital connection severed. I powered the device down and slipped it into the pocket of my dark trousers beneath my academic gown. I walked out of my private office and joined the procession line in the main corridor. The university arena hummed with the collective vibrating energy of thousands of guests. The faculty members wore their traditional heavy regalia. The air smelled of floor wax, polished wood, and fresh floral arrangements. I took my assigned seat among the doctoral candidates. I listened to the opening speeches delivered by the university chancellor. My mind drifted back to the sweltering heat of the parking structure 4 years prior. I remembered the gnawing hunger, the pervasive fear, the terrifying realization of my own profound erasure. Those memories did not ache anymore. They served as the mortar for the impenetrable foundation I constructed. When the dean called my name, the sound echoed through the vast auditorium. I walked across the elevated stage. The bright halogen lights illuminated the varnished floorboards. Dr. Reed waited near the central podium. She wore her own velvet robes, her silver hair catching the stage, lighting her posture straight and uncompromising. She held the doctoral hood in her steady hands. As I turned my back to her, she draped the heavy velvet fabric over my shoulders. It represented a gesture of profound academic arrival. But for the two of us standing on that stage, the fabric carried a deeper, silent significance. She did not merely mentor a promising scientist. She harbored a displaced refugee. She provided the quiet sanctuary that allowed me to forge my own armor. I turned around to face her. We exchanged a brief, knowing glance. No words were required between us. The transaction was complete. The debt was settled through mutual respect and rigorous survival. Following the conclusion of the ceremony, the graduates spilled out into the central campus courtyard. The Arizona weather shifted during the event. Bruising storm clouds gathered over the jagged peaks of the McDowell Mountains. A sudden sharp desert downpour washed over the concrete walkways. The rain in Arizona carries a specific, intoxicating scent. The moisture hits the dry creosote bushes and the baked desert earth, releasing a fragrant, sharp aroma. It is a scent that signals survival, resilience, and renewal. I stood under the protective concrete overhang of the science building, watching the water pool on the stone tiles. I breathed in the cold, wet air. I pulled my phone from my pocket and powered it back on. The screen illuminated, displaying a single notification. A voice message waited in my inbox, originating from the unlisted correctional facility number. I pressed play. I held the speaker to my ear, watching the rain wash the dust from the courtyard stones. The automated institutional voice announced the origin of the recording. Then Harrison began to speak. "Chloe, please do not delete this message." He paused, drawing a shaky, uneven breath. The background noise echoed with the harsh, metallic clatter of heavy steel doors and distant shouting voices. It was a bleak, unforgiving acoustic environment. "I know you hung up the call. I understand. I just need you to hear me today. The sentencing hearing is next week. The public defender says the federal judge will not offer leniency. I am facing 8 years minimum." His voice cracked. It was a pathetic, brittle sound, devoid of the unearned arrogance that defined his existence. "Victoria stopped answering my letters 3 months ago." He continued, the desperation bleeding through the audio compression. "The bank foreclosed on the house. The holding company seized the cars. I have nothing left, Chloe. I sit in this cell for 23 hours a day, and I realize the magnitude of my mistakes. I threw away my own flesh and blood. I am sorry. I am so sorry for the bedroom, for the money, for everything I did. Please, you are the only family I possess. Just write me a letter. Just tell me you forgive me." I listened to his plea. I analyzed the tone, the phrasing, and the underlying motivation with the same clinical precision I applied to epidemiological variables. He did not apologize because he experienced a sudden moral awakening. He apologized because the concrete walls of his federal holding cell offered no audience. He possessed zero remaining wealth to manipulate a new inner circle. He lacked the designer suits required to project authority. He reached out to the daughter he discarded because I represented his final fraying tether to the outside world. He wanted absolution to ease the crushing weight of his own consequences. I did not feel a sudden surge of vindication. I did not feel pity. I felt the quiet, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I lowered the phone. I did not listen to the final seconds of his recording. I pressed the delete icon. The audio file vanished into the digital void. I navigated to the contact settings and initiated a permanent block on the facility routing system. I severed the final thread tying me to the architect of my displacement. He wanted me to offer forgiveness. He wanted me to grant him peace. But forgiveness implies a restoration of the bond, a willingness to carry the burden of the trespass. I refused to carry his burden for another second. He earned his concrete walls. He earned his isolation. I stepped out from beneath the concrete overhang. The cool rain hit my face, soaking into the dark shoulders of my academic robes. I walked across the wet pavement toward the parking lot where I left my vehicle. I still drove the 2008 Honda Civic. It ran perfectly. It represented the vehicle of my survival, a reliable machine that carried me through the darkest 11 nights of my life. I kept it as a constant physical reminder of the floor I hit and the ceiling I shattered. My mother told me to never let a man hold the keys to my safety net. For a long time, I believed a safety net consisted of a physical house, a joint bank account, or the guaranteed protection of a parent. I was wrong. A true safety net is not a physical object you inherit. It is the unyielding, razor-sharp intellect you construct when every other resource is stripped away. It is the discipline to sit in a laboratory for 80 hours a week while your peers socialize. It is the tactical patience to lock a forged document in a fireproof box and wait 4 years to execute the perfect legal retaliation. Family is not determined by shared genetics or a common surname. Family is the mentor who finds you washing your hair in a basement sink and offers you a spare bedroom without asking for gratitude. Family consists of the people who stand beside you when the facade shatters, not the people who melt down your history to wear it as a cheap accessory. I reached my car. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. I placed my doctoral cap on the passenger side. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw a 23-year-old woman holding a lucrative biomedical patent, a pristine credit score, and an impenetrable academic reputation. I saw a scientist who excised a toxic element from her life with surgical precision. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life. I shifted into gear and drove out of the university lot, heading toward the foothills of the McDowell Mountains. I owned a quiet, beautiful home there. I bought it with my own money. The walls featured no hand-painted murals, but the doors featured heavy deadbolts that only my key could open. I drove into the desert storm, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, behind me. Thank you for walking this journey with me until the very end. If you ever found yourself pushed out of your own life by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to remember this story. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep toxic relatives warm. If this narrative resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you found that forged bank slip. I will see you in the next story on Luke Vengeance. Stay sharp, stay unbothered, and always keep your own keys. What makes a home? It is a question that seems simple on the surface, yet it unravels into infinite complexities the closer you examine it. A home is not defined by its square footage, the zip code it occupies, or the manicured landscaping that borders the driveway. In its truest, most essential form, a home is a promise. It is the unspoken sacred contract between a parent and a child that declares, no matter how harsh the external world becomes, you are safe within these walls. When we reflect on the chilling trajectory of Chloe Morgan, a brilliant young woman forced to trade the sanctuary of her childhood bedroom for the suffocating heat of a Honda Civic, we are forced to confront a terrifying reality about modern family dynamics. What happens when the architect of your safety net becomes the very person cutting the ropes? In American culture, there is a pervasive, almost intoxicating pressure to project an image of effortless success. The pursuit of the American dream frequently tempts individuals to prioritize the aesthetic of wealth over the moral bedrock of character. Harrison Cole was a master of this illusion. He wore the custom suits. He shook hands at the country club, and he smiled for the glossy promotional brochures. He provided a portrait of a thriving traditional family. Yet beneath the veneer of commercial success, he abandoned the most fundamental duty of a parent, the unconditional protection of his offspring. Parenting is not a public relations campaign. It is a quiet, relentless duty rooted in profound emotional awareness. When Harrison decided to gut Chloe's bedroom to accommodate the son of his new girlfriend, he did not merely make a logistical real estate decision. He committed a profound act of emotional erasure. The transition between adolescence and adulthood is incredibly fragile. A 19-year-old college student may legally be an adult, but they still require the psychological anchor of a home base. A traditional family structure thrives on a clear hierarchy of care where children understand they possess inherent, unshakable value. By telling his daughter to sleep on the sofa and figure it out, Harrison demonstrated a catastrophic lack of emotional intelligence. He discarded her the moment her presence became inconvenient to his new romantic narrative, teaching her that family loyalty is conditional and temporary. Furthermore, the bedrock of any enduring family is honesty. A parent serves as a child's first moral compass. The way a mother or father navigates truth and consequence sets the internal baseline for how a child will interact with the world. When Harrison forged Chloe's signature to siphon $32,000 from her dead mother's life insurance, he did not just commit federal wire fraud. He shattered the foundational trust that binds a family together. Fairness and integrity are virtues we constantly preach to our youth. We tell our children to work hard to play by the rules and to earn their place in society. Chloe did exactly that. She spent her days studying epidemiology, dedicating herself to the grueling pursuit of higher education. Yet she was punished while her stepbrother, a young man who squandered his opportunities, was rewarded with a luxury truck bought with stolen funds. This blatant subversion of fairness within the home creates a deep, lasting psychological wound. When parents operate with deceit and favoritism, they teach their children that the world is inherently corrupt and that safety can only be found in isolation. Long-term guidance in parenting is not about clearing every obstacle from a child's path, nor is it about subjecting them to unnecessary cruelty to toughen them up. True guidance is about equipping a child with the tools to navigate adversity while standing firmly behind them as a failsafe. Chloe's mother understood this. Even from a hospice bed, she tried to provide long-term guidance. She left a financial safety net, but more importantly, she left a piece of enduring wisdom. Never let a man hold the keys to your safety net. Chloe took that wisdom and forged it into an impenetrable armor. She survived 11 days in a parking structure. She built a stellar academic reputation. She secured a biomedical patent. She became a formidable, self-reliant woman. But we must pause and ask ourselves about the cost of that forced resilience. Children should grow into strong, independent adults because they were nurtured, guided, and supported, not because they were abandoned and forced to survive their own parents. The independence Chloe achieved was magnificent, but it was born from trauma. As a society, we must strive to raise children who are strong because they are loved, not strong because they had no other choice but to fight alone. The story of the Cole family serves as a dark mirror held up to our own domestic lives. It asks us to examine the quiet corners of our own relationships. Are we leading with honesty? Are we demonstrating true fairness to the people who depend on us? Are we prioritizing the emotional well-being of our children over our own comfort, ego, or social standing? The legacy we leave behind will not be measured in country club memberships or the cars parked in our driveways. Our legacy will be measured by the character of the people we raise and the memories they carry of how we made them feel when they were at their most vulnerable. We all have choices in how we shape the next generation. We author the narratives that our children will one day tell. If these reflections resonate with you, if you find pieces of your own history hidden within the quiet spaces of these narratives, I invite you to subscribe and follow the channel Sophia Told Stories. We explore the profound, often hidden dynamics of human relationships, peeling back the layers of family betrayal and resilience one story at a time. Join our community and let us navigate the complex architecture of the human heart together. As we close this chapter, take a moment to look at the quiet spaces in your own life. Look at the keys sitting on your kitchen counter. Look at the faces of the people sitting across the dining table. We spend our lives building houses, acquiring possessions, and chasing the horizon, often forgetting that the most fragile, valuable things we hold are the trusts placed in us by our children. A house can be rebuilt. A bank account can be replenished. But once the foundational trust of a family is melted down and recast into something unrecognizable, it can never truly be restored to its original beauty. You are the architect of your family's history. The question remains, when the storm finally breaks, will the walls you built offer sanctuary? Or will they simply wash away in the desert rain?